Fish.
Here.
Saltzman. Novick.
Here.
Hales.
Here. Welcome, everybody. We have some communications items up front, and we'll get those folks up momentarily. Following that, we've got some time-certain council calendar items, as well as a 4/5 item, which is something that the council can do by mutual agreement, and that is we've added an item to the council calendar today, which is a resolution about the human rights developments in North Carolina. That will take up last at the end of our agenda following all the regular council calendar items. If you're here to speak on a calendar item, just let our clerk know, and she'll make sure that you're included in those that are signed up to speak. We typically allow 3 minutes to testify on items before the council. And if you're representing an organization, let us know that, please. We try to practice the rules of decorum in this chamber. Obviously, there have been exceptions to that, which we have to deal with, but we ask that we support our fellow citizens with a smile or a wave of the hand or a thumbs up. And if you feel compelled to show disagreement with someone, a thumbs down or some other polite hand gesture is okay, but we don't have applause and demonstration in this chamber with the exception of visiting dignitaries and school children. So if you're one of those, you might get some applause from your fellow Portlanders this morning. So students, not just children, students and dignitaries get special treatment. We discriminate that way and will continue until further notice. So with that, let's please take our communications items 287.
Request of Mary Pavito to address council regarding the latest Portland air toxics.
Good morning, Mary. Come on up. I know there's several people that want to speak on the same topic today, so if any of you want to come up together, that's fine, but individually is fine too. Good morning.
Good morning. So thank you for this opportunity. My name is Mary Pivito, and I'm president of Neighbors for Clean Air. Neighbors for Clean Air is a grassroots member organization that works to protect the health of Oregonians from toxic air pollution. So while many people in Portland woke up to the problem of toxic air February 3rd, this news was no surprise to our members. Recent news coverage has focused on the time lag between when DEQ first learned about the U.S. Forestry Service's moss study in May 2015 and February 2016 when the public did. But the real delay by the agency to address toxic air pollution should be measured not in months, but in years and even decades. This is not a new problem, just a newly popular one. There were strong activists in the 90s like Sharon Janassi fighting industrial pollution in my own neighborhood. There was Jerry Williams Jimenez, who was founding member of the Environmental Justice Action Group, now OPAL, who worked to reduce heavy diesel emissions in North Portland, estimated by EPA and DEQ to be some of the highest in the state. The citizens of North Portland that she was fighting to protect were also found to have the highest rates of respiratory ailments that exceed statewide and national averages. In 2009, 6 years after Oregon's air quality rules were amended to purportedly address the dangerous air toxics that Federal Clean Air Act doesn't, I stumbled on a national study showing that Chapman Elementary School that my 3 children attended, ranks among the worst 2% in the nation. Since then, NCA has taken on pollution battles that our state regulators would not, in what has been an ongoing David versus Goliath battle. Without state-level accountability, we've been left with do-it-yourself air emissions regulations, relying on hard-won good neighbor agreements and odor regulations to make headway. We've been successful in winning small battles against big polluters like ESCO, Vigor, and Intel, and we're proud of these, but they don't come easy, and they aren't far enough because they leave too many people behind. We know still that the highest levels of air pollution are in neighborhoods with higher percentages of African American, peoples of color, and poor, and most of these victories have been won by white homeowners. I specifically learned about Portland's elevated levels of cadmium and arsenic, along with diesel particulates and a dozen other toxics that exceeded the established health thresholds over 5 years ago as a member of the DEQ's Portland Air Toxic Solutions Advisory Committee. The problem is not that the agency charged with oversight of our state air quality didn't know about the pollution in the air. The problem is that they didn't do anything about it. I've submitted 2 documents with my testimony, one from 2011, a North Portland cadmium memo, and a second one, which is the air monitoring report from 2005, which clearly show regulators knew but failed to act to protect our health which is one of the key missions. So why I'm here today to talk to you and the rest of the folks here that will speak to you is that we have been working for a long time to deal with this at the state level, and we just can't. The regulatory captivity, the stranglehold that industry lobbyists have on state legislators make it impossible. So it's
You've used
time.
your time, but I think we're going to have some questions for you about
Okay,
that.
so we're here to ask that you join, all the city commissioners join Mayor Hales in aggressively seeking more solutions at the local level and to aggressively support Multnomah County and other jurisdictions in looking at local air quality district management. Thank you.
Thank you for your advocacy. Appreciate that. I want to hear from the other folks on the same subject, and then we might actually want to discuss it for a moment because this is a kind of an unusual situation to have a whole bunch of people on the same topic. So appreciate you coming. So who's next?
Thank you, Mayor Hales and Commissioners. For the record, my name is Mark Riskadal. I'm the Executive Director of NEDC, the Northwest Environmental Defense Center, based up at Lewis and Clark Law School here in Portland. Major flaws in Oregon's air quality regulatory system have recently sparked significant controversy. Last month, the federal congressional delegation representing the Portland metro area even declared with a unified voice that Portland is in the midst of a public health emergency. Portland's air, it turns out, is filled with toxic hotspots. Moving forward out of this morass will require thoughtful reductions in pollution associated with harmful diesel particulate and residential wood burning, but it will also, importantly, require reductions in hazardous air pollutant emissions from industrial sources. The Oregon State Legislature expressly mandated that the program for the control of air pollution in this state shall be undertaken in a, quote, progressive manner. Oregon's lawmakers clearly did not intend for us to get mired in outmoded, ineffective, gap-filled air quality oversight. The all too frequently recurring loop of inadequate regulatory oversight by the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, DEQ, significant emerging air pollution problems, finger-pointing at DEQ, demanding that the agency fix the problem, and then hearing the agency respond that it doesn't have the resources and is unable to muster the will to address the problem, is simply broken. The agency's recent vague commitment to embark on a time-intensive, formal toxic hotspot rulemaking at some indeterminate point in the future in which industry inevitably dominates the conversation and predetermines the outcome, or to simply revisit the agency's multi-year, multi-million-dollar Portland Air Toxic Solutions geographic program, a program that utterly failed to identify and craft solutions last time around to the problems that have garnered recent headlines, are not enough. DEQ has pre-existing legal authority under Oregon's state air toxics program to immediately establish and implement aggressive toxic hotspot assessment and control strategies, particularly for specific source categories such as glass manufacturing. Yet it apparently lacks the regulatory will to implement those strategies. The Oregon Legislature and the Oregon Environmental Quality Commission have pressed Oregon DEQ for years to do more to reduce the threats of harm to public health and the environment posed by air toxics, and have provided the agency with ample authority and regulatory discretion to do just that. Yet the agency has failed and continues to fail. It's time for a new path forward. If Oregon DEQ continues to fail to adequately respond, a growing chorus of concerned citizens and voices within Portland local government have recently expressed the interest and intent to assert local control over Portland's air pollution problem. In furtherance of that objective, the state legislature has already provided a clear avenue for the creation of regional air control authorities. Old guard industrial polluters will, of course, kick and scream that more government isn't the solution, but we're not just talking about simply adding another superfluous layer of government. We're talking about crafting a local solution to a local problem. Air quality regulation of, by, and for Portlanders. The concept of a local air district or local air pollution control authority is well established in other states. Even just between our West Coast neighbors, there's 35 air districts in California and 10 in Washington. This is a solution that with strong local leadership we can move forward. Thanks for your time, I appreciate it.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. Mayor, members of council, my name is Paul Van Orden. I've taken a day off work today to address you on this issue. Why is New Jersey 30-plus years ahead of Oregon on air pollution? For 5 to 6 years of my 25-year career in environmental law enforcement, I worked in Newark, New Jersey on air pollution enforcement and contaminant registration. When I moved to Oregon 20 years ago from New Jersey, Portland was at that time 20 years behind the logical process of identifying, registering, and enforcing air pollution regulations used by the Essex Regional Health Commission in New Jersey. Essex Regional was the first air pollution agency in the United States and existed before the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. It is a regional air authority. Today, sadly, Oregon is at least 30-plus years behind the state of New Jersey in identifying, managing hazardous air pollutants. New Jersey has an organized air pollution regulatory system of using routine inspections, registration, cataloging hazardous and toxic contaminants at a given location, regulation of substance, monitoring for releases and contaminants, and taking legal enforcement action on behalf of their children, families, and individuals. Essex Regional Health, a regional government structure much like Metro, responds to a single air pollution odor complaint. DEQ has more or less a test system for odor response right now that requires many, many complaints to potentially even take action. Portland children, my own two kids under 5 years of age, should have at least as many environmental safeguards as people are offered in North New Jersey. I would hope that this might be compelling for the mayor to be part of his legacy in his last months in city council. State air pollution regulation needs more funding, needs to be more robustly funded. There's been a lot written in the last few months about making improvements to the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality to rush to formulate emergency rulemaking to address 2 single source locations that make glass. The approach to make improvements is not simply a matter of adding more air pollution monitoring equipment and sampling to solve the growing issue of air pollution in Portland and the disparity of the communities that are impacted by the toxins. A few changes to the State Department of Environmental Quality do not address the heart of the issue at hand. We need to be moving forward in a thoughtful and calculated local, regional, and statewide fashion to develop a more regional and local authority to address community issues related to air pollution. New Jersey's done that for 40 plus years. We can stop living off the laurels of Tom McCall. In 1991, then Governor Barbara Roberts was in a tough fiscal position and started the slippery slope of gutting entire environmental enforcement programs that the community relied on and that could have helped us prepare our state as it became more dense. We can no longer place our environment, the leading reason why many of us live here, at the bottom of the fiscal ledger. I'm going to skip additional comments on a regional authority and just say, locally, we have city options to start making change immediately directly in the Portland City Code. This is contrary to the perspectives of local enforcement officials saying that this is solely an issue for the state DEQ. In Portland City Code Title 33, we actually have a piece of air pollution enforcement regulation.
Already, yeah.
And that's in Title 33 relative to odors in the community. It's very poorly written and could be rewritten.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank the three of you. I know there are 2 more that want to talk on this subject, but I think this might be, we might want to take a few minutes just to discuss this. I mean, let me tell you the sort of the status of my thinking on this issue. And as you know, I signed a letter along with Chair Kafuri and have met with the DEQ and have said, get on with it. We have this ability in both state law and actually, Paul, I was unaware of the city code, to create a local air authority if the state isn't performing. But let me sort of voice again, sort of work in progress here and a frustration. The city often finds itself in a position of having to do work or perform functions that actually are fundamentally the responsibility of another government. And it's the old, it sounds a little bit like it's not my department, but bear with me for a moment. Depending on where you are in the city of Portland, where we happen to be sitting right now, I think there are 9 governments that have some responsibility for law and enforcement and public services. Federal, state, metro, TriMet, city, school district, ESD, add them up. There's somewhere between 8 and 10, depending on where you are in the city. We find ourselves, over the long span of time, the city has often ended up performing or assisting those other governments' functions. We've helped fund schools in their hours of need. We have helped fund a Unity Center that will provide psychiatric emergency care in the Lloyd District for people that are in a psychiatric crisis in our city, even though we are not the public health authority nor the state mental health agency. So the city often finds itself in this position of our citizens want a higher level of effort or a higher level of regulatory rigor than we're receiving from some other government. And our resources aren't infinite, and we also want to maintain good neighborly relations with all these other governments that have their jobs to do. So that's the only reticence that I feel on this issue. I don't think this council is certainly willing to regulate business and industry. We do it all the time. We're certainly willing to stand up for the environment. We do it all the time. But I think our only caution here is that we actually have public agencies that are supposed to be doing this work. And our first choice is for them to do that. So that's sort of the status of my thinking on the issue. We signed the letter. We basically are are sort of holding our gavel saying, we can do this, state, we can create a local air authority. Is that our first choice? Not sure.
Mayor, can I just
Yes,
add
please.
something, and I appreciate the mayor's comments. What I want to add to the conversation is a plea that we broaden the lens a little bit, and I'll tell you why. The question of toxins in the air is the issue of the moment because of recent history, and the apparent failures of some of the regulatory systems has now been made very clear. But I think we have to be clear that this is just one of a number of public health issues that we're facing right now. The largest public health issue facing our community today is Superfund. And the EPA is about to come out with a proposed plan. It could have a price tag of something between $1.5 and $2 billion with the laudable goal of cleaning up the Willamette. But then as a community, we're going to have to figure out how to pay for it with all of our partners. In light of Flint, Michigan, and Newark, and this broader national conversation about the lead and copper rule, EPA is looking at revising those rules and changing the landscape and optimizing compliance. Well, to the mayor's point, that may, from a public health point of view, may be very laudable. But who's then going to pay for the fallout? You could have a rule at the federal level that causes us to no longer be able, for example, to have a variance from treating our water. You could have a new set of dictates that then produce several $100 million of new obligations locally. The two things I want to mention is, one, I think we need to broaden the lens to include an array of public health issues. And two, we have to hold the federal government accountable for being a partner. And once upon a time, there was money that flowed our way. Most of the major investments we've made on public health issues in the last 20 years, we've had to pay for locally. Just in our utilities, about $2 billion. Then, of course, people complain about rising rates and how we pay for it. So broader lens, and then bringing our congressional delegation into the conversation and insisting that Washington become a stronger partner, particularly in providing some relief for us. If we are going to step up and tackle some of these things, we need funds. And right now, Congress is not supporting a number of these efforts, and there is a limit to what we can do with our local tax base to respond. So I think your point's very well taken. Broaden the lens, and then I think we have to find some additional funding to actually address this problem.
I had one comment and two questions. The comment is that you're absolutely right. Oregon is way behind. And in fact, when I worked for the Federal Justice Department in the late 80s and early 90s, representing EPA, Oregon environmental law enforcement was rather a joke within EPA. I mean, I remember people saying that environmental enforcement stops at the Columbia River because Washington State took environmental enforcement more seriously than Oregon did. And unfortunately, that has not changed. Following up on the comment Commissioner Fish just made, I am curious as to how the local air authorities in other states are funded. How have they come up with the money to fund those authorities? The other question I had is there was an op-ed in the Oregonian a few weeks ago reminding me of something I once knew but had forgotten, which is that Eugene passed a toxics right to know law saying requiring emitters of toxic pollutants to keep track of them and report them. And then the legislature passed sort of preemption language that makes it virtually impossible for any other jurisdiction to do the same thing. I was curious as to whether you thought that the Eugene law, even though it's just a reporting law, has an effect, and is it worth our lobbying the legislature to get them to overturn that preemption, among all the other preemptions they've imposed on local governments?
Yeah, thoughts about that?
Sure. Well, I think that the right to know piece first, responding to that question, is that transparency is a really critical part of what is at concern. I think foremost in Portlanders' minds, people just don't have a sense of what's going into the air, what's happening in their neighborhood. So that right to know piece, that lends some transparency to that equation, but it doesn't. That system down in Eugene doesn't require any specific reductions or any actions. So the reporting piece is useful, but it's just sort of an informational piece. A lot of that information is already available through the toxic release inventory and other mechanisms.
So on the question of funding, in New Jersey, one of the interesting things that's not happening in Oregon, and it's actually an issue across the board, not just for air pollution, but also for fire response, if we have an earthquake, is I would go into facilities when I did environmental law enforcement in New Jersey, and even a teeny facility, I would register all their contaminants and toxins, and we would have that registered. So if there was an issue like we're seeing currently with the glass manufacturers, we'd be able to go into a database and say, it could be these 4 folks, and we'd have a starting point. That contaminant registration fee helps to fund a major chunk of work that goes on in that arena. So it's a way to recognize if you choose to use these contaminants, there's a fee for it, it's a reasonable fee, and it's been in existence for quite some time.
Thank you.
Could I-
Please.
I think I would be remiss not to mention that while funding is obviously a really important question, the cost is also an incredibly important issue to highlight. And that we know that Multnomah County, for example, their, which I understand is, broader than Portland, but we understand that, our proportion of the cost of diesel pollution alone is upwards of $2 billion in public health, in the loss of life, loss of productivity, and all the related health concerns that are related just to the diesel pollution alone. And we know that we have the highest concentration of that emissions. I will also say that there are federal dollars that do come into our state through a mechanism called CMAQ, which is the Congestion Mitigation Air Quality Fund. And that money, a congressional report in 2012 recommended, did not require, because the federal government did not want to dictate how the money is spent. But the recommendation from the congressional 2012 report was that money was recommended to prioritize diesel emission reductions. And we in our state have not used a dime of our money on diesel reductions. And I will tell you that if you have the dirtiest diesel trucks and the dirtiest fleet in the country running through your city, it doesn't matter if you're reducing congestion, because the number of trucks, the amount of diesel pollution does not change. And that we need to prioritize the reduction of the most deadly pollution that we have, which is diesel.
Where did that money go?
It goes into transportation budgets that are, Metro oversees the regional transportation budget.
So Metro has the ability to send it to some of it towards diesel emissions.
They respond to the requests of the municipalities who apply for the money.
But Mary, I'm sorry, but isn't it, rather than spending public money to facilitate diesel emission reduction, shouldn't we just pass a law saying that diesel vehicles are subject to the same rules as in Washington and California?
Yes, as an advocacy point, that is my clearest advocacy point, is I believe that we should pass a diesel standard today, which our state has the authority to do with no needed mandated action. I was responding to Commissioner Fish's issue on funding specifically, but yes, I agree.
And you've been
Commissioner
pushing for
Novak.
that for many legislative sessions.
Yes, we
So
have.
we need to continue to add it to our list. In the meantime, we can ask Metro to give some of the dollars that they have authority over to this issue. Should Metro be the regional air authority, Multnomah County, Portland, if we have to do it at the local level?
I think the boundaries that Metro represents municipalities that probably should all be in partnership on this. I will not try and speak to the organizational construct at this point. I really appreciate that what Mayor Hales and Commissioner Kafori have asked for is a strong feasibility study of what a local air management district would look like.
And
So
I would also,
could you talk about that, Mayor?
Yeah,
What you've asked for?
well, why don't we let the next 2 folks speak, and then we'll spend a little more time in discussion. We're kind of deviating from our procedure, but this is a big deal. This issue is a big deal.
And
So-
Mayor, maybe we could ask Mary Pivotal to stay, since she's been
Yeah,
such a leader on
yeah,
this.
if you would, please. Thank you both.
Okay,
And
thank
Mary,
you.
do stick around. Let's hear from the other 2 folks and then have a little more discussion and get back to our.
290 and 291, Sarah Livingstone to address council regarding the latest Portland air toxics crisis, and Teresa Kishi Soto to address council regarding challenges with our Portland air.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Mayor Hales and council members. My name is Sarah Livingstone, and my husband, 16-month-old baby girl, and I live in southeast Portland, 5 blocks from Bullseye Glass, which is within the half-mile radius of where the Oregon Health Authority told residents that it was not safe to eat out of our gardens. This past January, I had 3 trips to the ER for not being able to breathe and severe chest pain. I was diagnosed with pneumonia and pleural effusion, which is fluid between the linings of the lungs. I am normally a very healthy person, and this came on very suddenly. At the time, I did not know about Bullseye Glass heavily polluting our neighborhood 5 blocks from our house with cadmium, arsenic, chromium, and other toxic heavy metals for decades. The story had not broken yet, and they had not suspended using heavy metals. I'm not the only one whose health is possibly affected by toxic air pollution. Numerous people in my southeast neighborhood who live very close to Bullseye have contacted me telling me they've had very similar health problems. A few women wrote to me that they had pleurisy, inflammation of the linings of their lungs, after they moved to this neighborhood that adversely affected them for 6 months. They live within 2 blocks of me. Another young mother who ate out of her garden all last summer while pregnant had a baby with an unexplainable hole in her lung and partial collapse. An 8-month pregnant mother named April, who lives a block from me and 4 blocks from Bullseye, received her heavy metal test and has arsenic levels that are 59 UG, and they should be between 0 to 29. How does one calm the mind of a pregnant mother who is due in 1 month and who has heavy metals 2 to 3 times what is considered normal? Some heavy metals pass to the unborn baby and can cause birth defects. Unfortunately, there are many more stories like this. I moved back to Portland to start and raise a family, like many people have done in the past and are currently doing. This is not the Portland that I thought I knew, and I feel like we have all been betrayed. The beautiful green city that we all love is not so green. Quite the contrary. It has been going on for many years. I feel like the rug has been pulled out from under my feet. Toxic heavy metal poisoning is not only a short-term health problem, but also a long-term one, unfortunately. It can take up to a decade to show itself. Are we to worry that in 5 or 10 years from now, our 16-month-old daughter will develop cancer or a behavioral disease caused by heavy metals, or that my husband's or my life will be shortened? How does one not worry daily about this moving forward? The DEQ and Portland city officials have known about these toxic and carcinogenic chemicals in our air for over a decade. The EPA has recognized the one-size-fits-all approach is outdated. The state and the city should dismiss this one-size-fits-all approach in fixing our toxic air crisis, as California has. Children are not smaller versions of adults. Children have developing immune, nerve, and bone systems much different than adults. Chemicals such as cadmium and lead can cross the placenta, negatively impacting fetal development milestone processes. Chemicals can also be found in breast milk, which is concerning to me as a breastfeeding mother. The community of Portland and I will not stop fighting and mobilizing until air quality regulations have been improved to protect the public health before polluter profits. Groups such as our Eastside Portland Air Coalition and Neighbors for Clean Air are leading this charge. Let's return Portland to being an environmental leader in this country. Oregonians deserve to breathe air that does not make us sick. Please help make this right.
Thank you. Good morning.
Hello. Let me say that. If you like it. Buenos dias, Mayor Hales and City Council members, Mr. Novick, Ms. Fritz, Mr. Fish, and Mr. Saltzman. May the day be going well for all of you. I am Teresa Casey Soto, and I am here as a member of Organizing People, Activating Leaders, Environmental Justice Oregon, to talk about my struggles with breathing in outer Southeast Portland. Long before I joined OPAL in 2010, OPAL was already calling attention to Portland's poor air quality, especially in the Southeast. As you know, because I come talk to you a lot, I live off of Powell Boulevard at the end of Southeast 125th Place. My apartment door at number 1 is 200 feet from the bus stop on Powell. When I first moved to Powell Court Villa in the fall of 2003, I lived in apartment number 10. Number 10 is about 100 feet from apartment number 1, where I now live. I did not have problems with breathing in that apartment. It's further back from Powell Boulevard. In 2007, I moved into apartment number 1, and by 2011, I found that I could no longer sleep in the bedroom. The smell of fumes and my struggle with breathing under those conditions would wake me up and force me to abandon the bedroom. I did try 2 different kinds of air purifiers. They didn't help. I have been sleeping on the floor of the living room since 2012. At first, I thought that I would be spared the foul, indescribable taste of fumes and the feeling that something heavy is coating my throat by sleeping on the floor in a different room. No, many times I am awakened between 2:30 a.m. and 5:30 a.m. by the same conditions that force me out of the bedroom. I have coughed so hard that I am no longer able to sing. I love to sing. I sang with the East Oregon Symphony Chorale for almost the whole 11 years that I lived in Eastern Oregon. If I have a night of normal breathing, I feel great in the morning. This usually happens when we have had wind during the day and the evening. I make it a point to ask drivers to stop idling their engines. While a person is writing out a check for the rent, while someone is waiting for a prescription at the drive-thru at Walgreens at the corner of Southeast 122nd and Powell, or while cleaning the laundromat. The lady cleaning the laundromat was actually going to let the engine of her van idle the whole time she was cleaning our apartment until I spoke to her and explained to her what was going on. In closing, I'd like to complain about the fact that DEQ disconnected the air monitor at the corner of Southeast 122nd and Powell Boulevard in 2004. Thank you, council members and Mayor Hales, for holding DEQ accountable, for addressing the health issues that are a result of diesel combustion. Thank you for supporting public transportation, and thank you for promoting a Don't Idle Your Car Engine movement in our beautiful city. When it comes to air quality in Portland, we must all work together to keep our city beautiful and livable, and I love Portland, and thank you all. Gracias.
Thank you very much. Well, I want to thank all of you for coming this morning. Again, this is a little bit unusual to take a topic and actually get into it a little bit, but this is really a critical issue in the community. And it's been something of a bilateral conversation, if you will, between everybody in Portland that cares about this, you, a lot of citizens in these neighborhoods, Chair Kafuri, me, all of us, and the state. But we've also sort of filed this point that, hey, we can create a local air authority, and we will if we need to. So I think that it really now has risen to the level where we probably ought to have something of a work session, perhaps between the county and the city council, to get into this issue in further depth, call on some of you as resource people. I realize Mr. Van Orden was here on his own time, but he's kind of a unique resource for us in that both he's had this experience of being an environmental regulator earlier in his career, but now he runs our noise enforcement function in the city, so he understands how to operate a regulatory program that the city has taken the leadership for. So it seems to me this has gotten to the point where we need to have a longer version of the discussion that we've just had this morning, and perhaps also with county leadership, because frankly, as a government person, I don't particularly care whether we have an effective regulatory program at the state or the county or the city. I just want one. And if in order to get one, if we have to form one locally, we need to determine, is that a joint venture? Is it a regional thing? You know, again, there's lots of mechanics to figure out, but the principle that we ought to have an effective environmental regulator, making sure that the city that we think is green actually is something that I think there's huge agreement for, not just here in this room, but in the community at large.
Mayor, just a comment. We're a couple months away from completing the heavy lifting on the budget and the comp plan.
Right.
Which are taking up a lot of the bandwidth here. And so heading into late spring, early summer, if you were to give instructions to the bureaus that were frontline bureaus as to doing some research, if we've had government relations come in with some of the legislative things, and we structured it somewhat like the way we did the Superfund briefing, which is a chance for the public and the council to get briefed on all the dimensions of the issue ahead of thinking through the policy implications, I would applaud, I would welcome that.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think that's the right timing too, and that we are doing this feasibility study. I'm not exactly sure when those results come back, but they ought to be by then. So then we'll have a little more research behind our options.
Do we need a budget placeholder, though?
Worth
not gonna be
thinking
free
about.
to implement.
Yeah, it's not going to be free. So that's a very good question. And again, the timing's good because we are working on our budget right now as well as on the comp plan. So I think that sounds sensible to me that in the next couple of months we'll line that up, call on some of you again as resources to take this discussion to the next level. But we really appreciate you highlighting it here by signing up this morning. It is a critical issue in Portland, and a lot of people are scared, and they should be, because we think we do live in a green city, and we have a right to.
One other question, since we have the panel here. One of the complications of our form of government is there are 5 of us. And the mayor has taken the lead, but obviously you want to make sure that all 5 of us are informed on the issue. So any thoughts about best ways for us to access the materials that you want us to sort of do our homework on ahead of any broader discussion?
I'm very happy to email you some supporting materials and would certainly make myself available, and anybody else that you would like to speak with individually, we'd be happy to avail
And
ourselves.
Zach Klonowski in my office, who's my point person on this issue. I'll make sure that he's coordinating with all the council offices as well, so.
And I think it's very important that citizens have a telephone number that they can call in and report situations like mine.
Yeah.
I'm sure my situation is not the only one.
Exactly.
I think it's really important that it get out there that there is a number that people can call. Thank you.
I just suggest that we also include some of the folks from the Department of Environmental Quality. There are a lot of really good people trying really hard and who know what some of the barriers are and what has been tried and that hasn't worked. So let's make sure that we include the state as partners to the extent
Yeah, that's
possible.
exactly right. And we've had good discussions with them. We're pushing them, but they're good people there that are interested in making a difference. So that's a fair point. Thank you all so much. This has been a very helpful discussion.
Thank you
for
very
us.
much for the time this
Appreciate
morning to
it.
discuss this.
Bet. Thank you. Okay, let's take up our consent calendar briefly and then go to the time certains. I don't, let's see, I do have one request to pull something from the consent calendar to the regular calendar, and that's item 301. Are there any others? Okay, then let's take a vote, please, on the balance of the consent calendar.
Fritz.
Aye.
Fish.
Aye?
Novick.
Aye.
Hales.
Aye. Okay, let's take item 292.
292, Office of Equity and Human Rights 2015 Annual Report to Council.
Well, good morning. Dante James is going to lead off this presentation this morning about how we as a city are acting on, living, and institutionalizing our values. Is there a PowerPoint? Okay. Carla will whisper the incantations necessary to make our AV system work. There we go. Just scroll it or click it? This one? How do I go back up? How do I go back up? There we go. Okay. You want to introduce our visitors while we're working on our?
Please.
Good morning. Welcome to Portland. Okay, how we doing on
I think we're good.
on
I think we're good.
technology here? Are we ready to roll?
I think we are.
All right. Good morning.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners. My name is Dante James. I'm the Director of the Office of Equity and Human Rights, and it is my privilege this morning to be able to present to you the annual report of the Office of Equity and Human Rights for 2015-16. And interestingly, I think it's very powerful that we have followed the previous presentation on essentially an environmental justice issue, which more often than not is a racial justice, a social justice issue. So it's absolutely an equity issue, and having these conversations about air quality and where and who is impacted by that. So I appreciate your taking that up and moving that forward. Before I begin, I'd really like to first, where'd I go? Okay, they're not.
Carla, we don't have it either. Oh, there you go.
There it is.
There it is.
Okay. Now we're-
Okay. I would first like to really thank my staff for their passion, their commitment, their patience, their perseverance, and their expertise in doing this work. I would ask them to stand or wave so that they can be publicly appreciated for the work that they do.
Good morning. Thank you all.
This work would not happen without this phenomenal staff. And they put in truly blood, sweat, and tears in doing this work because they believe in it. It is their passion and it is their calling. And they don't consider this a 9-to-5. It's what they do all the time. So I really do want to thank them for that. I also want to specifically recognize Jeff Selby for his continued excellent work in the preparation of the annual report document that you have before you. We always get comments on how well it's done, and I think you have each commented and or tried to steal Jeff to do some of your work, so I appreciate that. I also want to thank Judith Mowry, who has been acting as the interim director while I'm in Portland. I'll be in Portland all of the month of April, finishing our intercity agreement, so she's not done yet. And she's actually ill today, which hopefully doesn't reflect the level of difficulty in doing this work. And I also want to acknowledge the growing number of city staff and city leaders who have supported our work by making it theirs and taking it upon themselves to move this work forward in their bureaus or their departments. We have had a busy year. It's a year full of success as well as a year of moments with frustration and challenge. The office has expanded the depth and the breadth of its work, but also sometimes had to fight to be included in discussions where an equity perspective would bring valuable insight and improved outcomes for Portland residents of color and Portlanders with a disability. This year, we have watched this world, this country, and this city struggle with issues of race, while also seeing city staff and bureaus become more engaged about addressing institutional racism and how they can work to be part of change that dismantles it. We have celebrated the 25th anniversary of the Americans with Disability Act, while seeing the difficulty many have in addressing those with physical and mental challenges, and the institutional barriers that exist, both in physical and programmatic ways. The office has just celebrated its 4th birthday. March 12, 2012 was the first day of the office. In that relatively short period of time, the office has become a national model of equity work. You can see on the slide anyway, several jurisdictions with whom we have worked. We get phone calls every week from jurisdictions around this country asking how the office works, how we set it up, how does it engage with the governmental aspects of the city, how do we engage with the bureaucracy, how have we done what we've done. So we truly have become a national model in offering advice and assistance to other public and private entities on a regular basis. Just 2 weeks ago, the deputy mayor of New Orleans came with a staff member to spend 2 days with my office, learning how we have accomplished what we have and how we continue to do our work. We have truly tried to stay true to the Portland Plan and the many 5-year action items within it. Specifically, we have, in terms of the heading areas of the Portland Plan, we have closed the gaps, we have engaged the community, we have built partnerships, we have launched a racial justice initiative, we have increased focus on disability equity, and we have increased internal accountability. And so just what has been our work this past year. And so we've highlighted a number of things in the plan that you have. Obviously, we can't fit all of our work inside a document that you really spend any time reading. We really wanted to highlight some of the specific areas that we've done. So in general, we have continued to conduct and facilitate equity training. Our training curriculum and approach is a sought-after model because it is designed to offer concrete understanding and approaches to equity work. And if you look on page 4, some of the results of specific surveys that we have invited people to complete. Overall satisfaction with our training from all who have completed it is 92%. Satisfaction with facilitation has been 91.6%. The understanding of equity after the training has been 91.6%. And I think most telling is this, that's not in the document, that 75% of all who have participated in the training walked away and said they have an immediate ability with a practical takeaway to perform equity in the job that they do. I just think that's a huge statistic. And as we have, and I'll say this, as we have now made the training mandatory for all employees, we may see those numbers slip a little bit. The training that was not originally done, but that was done prior to it being mandatory, people would sign up on their own, or bureaus would specifically invite us to come and perform training. Now, I think we will see both sides of the spectrum of those who are really supportive, those who are, in the political term, persuadables, and those who just will never like doing this work. And so those, I guess I would just suggest maybe in the next year, some of those statistics may slip a little bit.
I have a question on that. On the previous slide, the 91% believe that they have a understanding of equity after the training. Is there any kind of test? Do we agree that they have a better understanding?
There's no test.
Self-reporting here.
It's self-reported,
There's
right?
self-reporting, because what I suggest, what I in the training, what we talk about is they should be able to walk out and explain to someone what equity is and the philosophy of the city and why it does it. Whether they agree or not, can they explain it if somebody says, what is this equity stuff? And this is their answer.
We might want to consider having a post-test just on that particular issue, because clearly if the evaluation says, unless you really hated the training per se and are willing to say so, obviously the answer to that question is supposed to be yes. And we have a lot of intelligent city employees who are going to tick yes. So I think it might be worth looking at some kind of qualitative evaluation, as you say, or even just specifically, can you recite the chapter and verse as to what the city's equity understanding is?
Provide an example or the description or definition, absolutely.
Yeah.
And just to be clear, all of these are anonymous, so there's no expectation that they're going to be called out because of whatever their answers are on the evaluation. But that's a good point. Thank you. We have, where am I? Am I going the wrong way? Yes. We have added and improved the training capacity of our staff by adding the responsibility of being on the training team for additional members of our staff. They are each passionate about this, and they wanted to become a part of our training team in addition to their other expected work. We often get requests to offer training to outside entities, but have been very selective, as we are stewards of our time and the budget you have given to us. We have, however, provided our training to entities such as the senior leadership of both the University of Oregon and Portland State University, as we consider how and what we are teaching the next generation. We have also provided training to Senator Merkley's staff. We have also allowed other jurisdictions or nonprofits that provide services on behalf of or in contract with the city to attend our trainings. We have continued to provide technical assistance to city staff and city leadership. And it's not my intention this morning to go through a list of all that support that we've provided, of all the accomplishments that we've achieved. I really would like to spend most of the time allowing our guests who are be invited after my remarks to offer their thoughts, answer any questions that you may have, and to offer a glimpse of the future of this office and its work. I do, however, want to highlight a few pieces of this year's work. So, under the leadership of the Commission on Disability, and with the assistance of Human Resources, we have a better snapshot based on surveys that were completed, 2 surveys actually were completed, of those employees in the city who identify as having a disability. If we are actually going to be a model employer of people with disability, we need to know if we are improving our hiring and how we are doing in creating a welcoming environment. We have provided support to the commissioner's staff as we work through regulating Uber and the requirements of their providing wheelchair-accessible vehicles in their services. We created the newest taxi cab company, PDX Yellow Cab, a Somali-owned and operated company, as it has become a reality. And I believe several of the drivers here are here this morning to offer their support. So if you are, please wave a hand. We continue to provide assistance with police equity training in the advanced academies and during regular in-service trainings. We also provided assistance to the personnel division as they changed the oral board questions to better understand who the applicants are as individuals who understand who they are as members of the largest society and the communities that they serve. Our engagement in the budgeting process that we are all in the middle of, with the budget equity tool and the office's engagement with council and the budget office and the budget hearings never fails to get oohs and ahs around the country for its innovation and equity engagement. We provided each of you the opportunity to vote on and support the new citywide racial equity goals and strategies. They represent a model of leadership that is envied and is being copied around the country. So as you can see, and you are very well aware of these particular goals and strategies, they have provided a goalpost for the bureaus as they prepare their racial equity plans. The roadmaps and the plans essentially lead to a racial equity strategic plan for the next 5 years. All of the bureaus have completed their assessments, internal assessments, and some of the bureaus have completed their plans. The rest are in the final stages of completion, and I'd like to share an example of just one of those that I thought was very well done. This is not the complete plan by any means. It's a couple of examples from the Bureau of Environmental Services. And it really reflects the good internal work that they've done in bringing all of their staff together to determine how they can better do equity internally and as they provide services from an external point of view. So in creating both action items, metrics, timeframes and timetables, as well as who's going to be accountable and responsible for ensuring the work gets done. And so one of their action items was they're going to partner with regional high schools and colleges and expand internships and other opportunities for students who are underrepresented in the Bureau. The director's office is responsible for that. And then their metrics is the number of high school internships that are completed for students from disadvantaged communities. Another is, did I just do that? Yes. I'm sorry. And similarly to partner with high schools and colleges, provide short-term shadowing opportunities so students can come from those underrepresented or underprivileged communities and shadow within the Bureau so they can get a better sense of the work opportunities that may be available to them and provide some sense of a greater awareness of what the Bureau actually does. And additionally, track and have a goalpost for the number of youth-focused career demonstrations or field trips that are engaged in with underrepresented high schools and underrepresented communities. I thought this was important, since I always say that if you want to know what's important to an entity, follow the money. The Bureau has its own equity and diversity committee, and they are establishing a specific budget for that committee to assist in ongoing training, possibly bringing an outside capacity to continue the conversation so that the idea of equity is just not a one-off, but it's a continuing conversation within that Bureau, and they're actually going to resource that with dollars. This also is important. They are going to ensure that there are equity metrics in employment or in annual performance evaluations. So by the end of next year, they will have performance evaluation criteria within all performance evaluations based on equity and inclusion. We have, where am I at? Black Male Achievement is still going strong. The BMA will be co-sponsoring, along with the county, a Black Men and Boys Healing Summit this summer. This past summer, the city of Portland, through the BMA, hosted 7 other BMA cities in a 2-day national convening, which culminated in the hip-hop concert in City Hall. This summer, it will once again be placing a group of young men in the Summer Works program. We'll also be leading a project to address an issue they see that is specific to their community. So moving forward, our goal is to continue to institutionalize and infuse this work in the city government and in the way that we do business. I believe, however, that we're in the most difficult phase of this work. Beginning this work is easy because everybody just says, I don't know how to do this, I don't know what this is.
Easy for you to say.
Yeah, that's true. Easier for maybe us as we try to expect people to listen to what we have to say when they will acknowledge they don't know. So that's why I say it's a little easier in the beginning to do this work. But we are, again, truly a national model. But we still have work to do. We are now at the place where many staff believe that they, quote unquote, get it. Unfortunately for some, there is not yet the depth of understanding of the root causes that are continuing to create the disparities that exist, or in the opportunities that we can create to better benefit everyone. So if I can use an analogy based on my over 40 years of doing martial arts, some of the most dangerous folks are those who are just before black belt, brown belt, red belt, because they know a little to be dangerous and hurt themselves as well as others. But they are not yet the expert in their ability to control what they do and how they do it and understand the depth of what they do. And so I would suggest now that we have a lot of brown belts and red belts running around the city who are not yet ready to be black belts. We have reorganized our office this year to be more efficient and effective, to ensure the continued best equity work for the city. Our next goal for the office is to look at a CBO-type model, where we provide expertise to bureaus by staff who are able to become more knowledgeable about the specific work of bureaus that they have in a particular portfolio. Bureaus use a human resource consultant even if they think they understand employment issues. Bureaus need a budget analyst to assist with their budget. I'm a licensed attorney, but I'm still expected to, and I need to, use the city attorney's office, especially in areas that are not of my expertise. The idea of an equity analyst with a portfolio of bureaus is analogous to each of these. More that we're doing. DEEP, the Diversity and Empowered Employees of Portland, which is under the umbrella of the office, will be moving forward with their leadership project, specifically for people of color and women. The goal is to build capacity and opportunity for people of color and women to move into the leadership pipelines that exist, both explicitly and implicitly, in this city. In the last 2 years, we have improved the overall number of people of color who work for the city from 18% to 21%, while the overall number of people of color in management or supervisory positions has remained about 5 to 6%. So this program will provide mentoring and networking, helping to address that number. We plan on enlarging our engagement on the issue of disability. Portland can become a leader in disability work, equity work, in the same way it has become a leader in racial equity work. That will require a citywide commitment of resources, a commitment to resource the Bureau of Human Resources as they lead on making the city truly a model employer of people with disability, a commitment to resourcing our office as we lead on disability equity and Title II. This will require your commitment individually and collectively, not just to be supporters, but to be advocates for this work. Beginning in late spring, when I finally returned from Oakland, our office is planning on going through a strategic planning exercise to map out the next 3 to 5 years of the office. We purposefully did not do that in the first couple of years of the office as we continue to create and evaluate the programs and practices that move equity work forward. And we talk about building the bike as we ride it. We essentially were number 3 in the country, really, to begin having an office in this way. Seattle was first, then King County, and then Portland. And so we are the OGs in this work. We're the old guard in doing this work. And so I won't call us old gangsters. We're the old guard in doing this work. And so as we began this, we were still really creating. And so at this point now, we're ready to really sink into a concrete 3 to 5 year strategic plan. One of my favorite sayings in training is that organizations move in the direction of the questions they ask. So we are constantly asking questions of our colleagues, and we do not shy away from asking ourselves similar questions about what works best and how we can improve. Our goal is, and always has been, to be transformational and not purely transactional. It is our intention to continue to embed this work, this conversation, and this way of doing business in our city government through our city staff. As I close, I want to thank you, commissioners, for your advocacy, for your commitment to this office, for engaging this office in your work, and expecting your bureaus to do the same. I want to specifically thank the mayor, who has become a full and complete supporter, not only of this office, but of the need for this work. He has included equity and expectations for budget and other city functions, and regularly raises awareness about institutional racism and institutional barriers when making presentations. Without the support of each of you, we would not be as far along as we are now. I'm often asked how we internally move this work forward to create change. I usually say that it is about building relationships with directors and staff more so than electeds, because electeds may come and go, while directors impact their bureaus on a daily basis. That said, this office has been blessed with a city council that supports this work. And even if we disagree sometimes, you continue to speak to and consider the importance of equity as it benefits all the residents of this city. I can honestly say that when I began this work in Portland 4 years ago, I did not expect to be able to use Portland as a role model for equity. I and my staff now proudly do so around this country. As I hope you've heard, Portland is leading the way, and you are leading the way in moving racial and disability equity forward in this conversation. And I just want to share a conversation I actually had with Andrew Scott, the budget director, yesterday. Because when we first started doing the budget equity process, the budget equity tool use, and having the conversation with the budget office 3 years ago, he told me that the conversation that he had had with his staff elicited the comments of, we just do numbers. Why do we have to worry about equity? Well, that's not our role. Why is that our role? We just evaluate the dollars and the cents and that kind of thing. And now, I mean, you've seen the budget analysis by many, many members of the budget office. And I would suggest that it's 180 degrees different, that there is now a specific equity analysis in each and every one of those budget analyses that are done by the analysts. And I think it's made a huge difference. I think you've seen specific recommendations to do something differently based on an equity analysis. We're going to recommend the capital improvement project go over here first, as opposed to over here based on equity. Funding this, not funding this, because it did not really address equity in the way it should. It's just, I think, a very complete difference from what it's been in the past. And in Oakland and other places I've been, people ask me, how do I know this work is, how it's working? How are we making change? And my answer is that the conversation now has become normalized. In the same way now we talk about sustainability or talk about anything else, recycling. I mean, when we started recycling, I gotta separate my trash. I don't want to separate my trash. How do I do that? And now people get mad because you don't have extra receptacles to do your recycling. So it's a normal conversation. I would suggest that is where the conversation about equity is in the bureaus and within the city government, is that now it's a part of the normal conversation that we ask, who are we impacting? What communities are being impacted by what we do and how we do it? How do we mitigate for specific issues? How do we mitigate for detrimental impacts to folks? That conversation is happening in a way it did not happen 3 or 4 years ago. So I hope that you are also proud of this work and are proud of the office and the city as it moves forward, leading in the next phase of enhancing equity in this city. We're not done. We don't always do it well. We don't even always do it right. But I believe that we do our work with the best interests of all residents in mind, understanding the extra issues that face people of color and people with a disability every day. And we have significantly moved the needle and normalized this conversation. Before I bring up invited speakers, where's my slide? There it is. We have a gift for you. The clerk has it, and she's going to offer them to you, I think. We have some cards for you that hopefully you can keep at your desk that will allow you to consider equity in all you do, in knowing how to start and what kind of questions to ask, in how you're evaluating whatever comes before you. Is my implicit bias impacting how I think about this issue? How will this issue impact communities of color? How will this issue impact people with disability? Is there an opportunity to mitigate any disparities? So when we talk about an equity lens, that's the buzzword. Everybody wants to get their equity lens so they can know how to do this. And I've seen them that they're so big that it takes a PhD to use. It shouldn't be. It should be a simple set of questions that you can easily run through your mind and evaluate what you're doing and how you're doing it. So we just offer this to you. Hopefully you tape it to your desk and use it on a regular basis. So those are my remarks. I have some invited guests that I would love to add to this conversation. Philip Wolf, who's a member of the city's Commission on Disability. Tracy Reeve, who is Portland City's attorney. And Ramfiz Villatoro, who's the Grassroots Giving Director at MRG Foundation. And after their remarks, I'm happy to take any questions you may have or go through this document a little bit more closely.
Great. Thank you very much, Dante. Why don't we go ahead and bring them up and then have you back. Thank you very much. Okay, come on up, please.
Let's make sure we have you on camera here. I think we still may be in. Is it?
First. Okay. Who's going to lead off?
All right. Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners. My name is Tracy Reeve. I'm the Portland City Attorney. And I'm here to appreciate the partnership that the Office of Equity and Human Rights has shown our office as we seek to achieve our own strategic goals. When I became city attorney a couple of years ago, we adopted 4 new strategic goals to guide our work. And one of them is to support and advance the city's objective of achieving equity in all of its programs, services, and activities. And the Office of Equity and Human Rights has really stepped up to assist us in doing that. Last year, we asked the office if they could provide training for all of our attorneys and staff in Equity 101, and they did that and tailored it for us. This past year, they've also provided training for our office, lawyers and staff on microaggressions and facilitated a discussion on those topics. This year in particular, I want to appreciate the work that the Office of Equity and Human Rights did to partner with us and the Governing Alliance for Racial Equity to put on a 2-day conference that was a convening of equity for government lawyers. And Dante's staff, and in particular Judith Mowry and others from the office, did a lot of work organizing that. We were able to piggyback on Professor John Powell being up here for some other work that he was doing. He's a Berkeley Law professor and the proponent of targeted universalism and a known scholar in these areas. And we were able to have all of the lawyers from our office, as well as lawyers from other local government offices and lawyers from offices around the country, participate for 2 days to talk about how, as government lawyers, we can support and advance equity in the work that our clients do. And it was just an excellent opportunity to learn from the best and also to share information with our colleagues locally and nationally. And we would not have been able to do that without the Office of Equity and Human Rights and our city's membership and participation in GARE, the Governing Alliance for Racial Equity. We also were able to use that to the city's benefit. Our office was able to get that 2-day conference certified for 10.5 hours of Oregon CLE credit. So all of our lawyers received that credit, as did the other local lawyers who participated. So as we strive in our office's work to advance the city's objective of achieving equity, we have just found the Office of Equity and Human Rights to be an outstanding partner.
Good morning.
Morning, Mayor, Commissioners. I wanted to start off by apologizing if I'm really jittery. Have a newborn and just had a ton of coffee this morning, so if I jump out of my seat.
Congratulations.
Yeah,
on your
congratulations.
Thank you.
Sleep deprivation will eventually be less of an issue.
Yeah, it's a little hazy right now. Today I'm really cognizant that I'm not the first, nor am I the last, for members of the public to testify on equity. And I think there's a general fear in the community about equity just being a buzzword, equity being a flavor of the month or the year, just like we feel like has been for diversity and inclusion in the past. These aren't just mere buzzwords for us. What we're really talking about is addressing remnants of institutional racism and implicit bias. And I think EHR and the city have done much to advance how the city sees equity and tries to address equity. But I think there is still challenges ahead that have been brought up today or been alluded to. From what I've heard from the community, when we're talking about the Equity in Contracting Purchasing Commission, we're talking about community benefit agreements around development projects, when we're talking about the Portland building and the 1%, folks are talking about equity. And when they mean by equity, they're talking about the bedrocks of accountability and transparency. The same thing we're talking about today, about how the oversight around our air quality is no different from air quality to what we're talking about for equity and inclusion within the city and our workforce. Transparency and accountability. Again, other themes of today, which is how can we move to where we are now? We're talking about creating, developing tools and lenses to see equity and having an equity lens to actually holding ourselves accountable to our equity goals. I think a true bedrock to reaching that is partnerships with community groups. I think it's a good first step internally to think about these things. But we have expertise and people outside the community. I'm talking about the groups like Urban League, Verde, who have worked on equity, who can bring a level of expertise to the city as it oversees its implementation of equity goals. I think it's a value added for the city to take that step of true partnership with community partners as we implement our workforce equity goals. This could be done via an advisory commission or an oversight commission. having expertise to review and revise our equity strategies, to review and revise what our bureau directors are implementing, but to make transparent our data, to make sure that our data is being reported in a timely manner. I think steps have been taken, but I think that's an area of an improvement where community partners can review and create a standard of how data is being reported. If the data is not reported accurately to community groups or in a timely manner, it inhibits our ability as community partners to effectively provide feedback for the city on its implementation of its equity goals. So today I asked the commission to recommit to equity, to recommit to community partners who have demanded equity in the past, not just in the areas of this commission, which I'm here to testify, but even in areas around contracting and purchasing, around CBAs, around the Portland building. Recently, community partners have partnered with OHR to present a resolution to bring in more oversight, but what I would call really a stronger partnership between community groups and the city to bring in a tool really to review and revise and give advice on how to implement its workforce equity goals. And until we have that mechanism built in place, I feel like the public just believes that equity is just a buzzword. And really, I think it's time, I think we're at the moment and juncture where community groups need to take ownership of equity. Equity cannot be co-opted. And if this is truly a priority, if equity truly matters, we truly want to address a history of racism within the city, then we must not go after transactional relationships. We must go after transformational change. And I think the ask for transparency and timeliness and accountability are really easy steps. So I'd be happy to talk more about this. I know there are other community partners who've been talking about this for before me for several years, who continue to, who are ready and willing and able to continue to come back to the table with the city and with the Office of Equity and Human Rights to put some more teeth, if you will, on how we implement our workforce equity goals within the city. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. I'd just like to respond. The focus of the office intentionally was internal, and the community, when it was set up, agreed with that. We have made progress, as has been reported in this annual summary. We still haven't trained all of our internal folks yet. We've increased the number of people of color from 18% to 21% in the city's workforce in the last 2 years, which is progress. It's not yet reflective of the community as a whole. So I think that that's probably a conversation that needs to happen with the new mayor as to when it becomes that the office starts working more intentionally with the community and inviting the community in to do more oversight. What we heard very strongly from the community when we set it up, which was surprising to me, I wasn't expecting to hear it, was first put your own house in order. And I think we've made a lot of progress towards that. How we re-engage with the community is a very valid point, and I'm going to be asking the council to look at the New Portlanders Council and expanding that into a commission. I think that conversation will inform what you're suggesting in terms of an oversight commission, or how does the Human Rights Commission interact, the Commission on Disability. There's a number of, we're not done yet, and I think that was your point, is that there's a lot more to do, and I absolutely agree.
Could I respond? I do thank you for that feedback. I think, from just to echo what we heard earlier today in Dante's presentation, I think those relationships need to be built outside of elected officials. I think it's between the bureau directors and those community partners.
Yes.
There is no reason why we can't get this done. This is a low-cost, efficient way of working. You know, we have groups who have expertise, who are willing and able to provide that. There is no reason why that work can't happen now. We do not have to wait for a new mayor for this relationship, these conversations to start happening. I think I would like to believe that we have the leadership now and the urgency of now to begin taking these steps. We've had these conversations, months ago, back in August, with the mayor's office. I think there is no reason, calling back again to the urgency of now. Now is a great moment to continue these conversations, to develop these strategies. But, in terms of, and also with the implementation of these work for equity numbers, there's still no transparency on what levels and what job areas are we seeing these numbers improvement. Is it just in one department? Is it in multiple departments? But these are, just questions I think the community and the public has.
Yeah, good points. Thank you very much. Good morning.
My name is Philip Wolf. Thank you for having me here today. It's good to see you all again, commissioners and mayor. I took a day off from work to be here today and provide a few comments that I want to share. I serve on the commission, PCOD, since 2013, and I've traveled from different cities: New York, DC, LA, San Francisco. I even learned gestural signs in France, and now I'm here in Portland. And with my experience and my experiences in different communities, Portland really shines. It's not just about equity. It's about inclusion and the environment and the people and the opportunities that are here to address the thoughts and experiences and philosophies that are out there. People here, they work in regards to equity, and I think there's a great opportunity that's been started. And now that I've been involved with PCOD and the process there, and understanding how OEHR supports the agencies and supports PCOD, I understand their role more now that I've been involved, and I'm really impressed with the office, and I'm grateful to have Dante James be the director and support our work. And it's a big office, and actually to go in and see the pictures on the wall and get to know him better and interact with him has been a great opportunity. And so I feel like I'm really getting an understanding. I'm proud to be here and to be on the advisory board. A big success that we recently had is in regards to the captioning that was passed because of you and the work that you did, and you took a bold risk to support that bill, and you heard us, so I want to thank you again for doing that. Okay, so to wrap up, Dante talked about equity, and I want to point out make a point about equity. It's not just a political statement, or just until the House of Oppression comes down. It should be a normalized conversation, as he was talking about, because we are all human. And so, as a model, the OEHR and the work they've done, I think that other cities can follow the work that we've done and emulate those results, and will create change, and that'll create impact. And there's several other states now that are asking me how we can adopt some of the stuff that we've done here in their cities. And so we're closing those gaps, and we're creating bridges between the deaf community and other communities of disability that have been overlooked in the past. And Portland has limited resources, but I'm here. I'm here as a resource and to collaborate with the members and the stakeholders involved. So I'm really proud to say that I'm looking forward to the model that we're creating and the more successes that we're going to have. We've looked over I've reviewed the budget, and I ask you to continue your support with the OEHR and their work with us, and I'm looking forward to continuing to be here and working with you. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate your presentations and appreciate your work on this priority for us as a city. Thank you so much. So anyone else want to speak on this report before we bring Dante back up for any final comments and discussion?
I have 3 people signed up.
Okay.
Joe Walsh, Dawood Muhammad, and Muhammad Dahir.
Please, come on up. I think maybe others had to leave, but. So go ahead, please, Mr. Walsh.
My name is Joe Walsh. I represent Individuals for Justice, and we take no money from city, county, or state funds. We like the brochure. Brochure is very impressive. One of the questions that was asked is that if we're dealing with equity, we have a problem right now with about 15 candidates running for mayor. And these forums that are being set up by nonprofits are excluding most of them. There's only about 2 or 3 or 4 or sometimes 6 that are invited. And they have these arbitrary decision-making processes that have nothing to do with equity at all. So when we pat ourselves on the back and we do really nice brochures with pictures of lots of people smiling, we have a problem because we can't get citizen representatives in front of the public because they don't raise $10,000. Think about that. What we're fed is the shills for the corporations because they got the money. They can raise $10,000, snap of a finger. Mr. Wheeler, Mr. Bailey, even Sarah. So when you say equity, what does that mean? Does that mean that we are going to treat people equally? No. It's a very closed loop. Look at this brochure. It's a closed loop. Congratulations. You're all doing a good job. This is not a critic of them. It's a critic of the system. The system is wrong. You cannot have equity and then turn around and say, we are not going to let you speak. We're not even going to let you on the bus. Never mind telling you to get in the back of the bus.
Since that committee is no longer meeting?
The ask would be the same. The transitional entity tentatively is called the Fellowship for Racial Equity. And so it will be a cohort of individuals from, not all, but a significant population of the bureaus so that we can have essentially a fellowship for 9 to 12 months where they can become very specifically focused on depth and breadth of equity work so that they can be, in some sense, the next entity that begins to spread this work throughout the city. So it is not yet in final phases, but that would be the ask, is that those individuals who are part of that fellowship be allowed the same sense of 10 hours per month of equity work from within their bureaus. Thank you.
It's the same amount of commitment.
Yes, yes.
Great. Anything you want to add to close this discussion? Thank you.
Not really. I mean, I think, just to make it clear that, as we've said, that the focus of the work is essentially internal, but that is so that communities will benefit from improved ways that the city does its work, improved ways that the bureaucrats and the city employees do their work, so that the city residents, all the residents, will benefit much more specifically because of how the internal aspects are rethinking about how to focus and how to do their work. So I just want to be very clear about that. That is, our goal isn't just to stay focused on just city employees, but because the end user of all of the work that the city employees do are the residents of the city, and that's really why we do this work.
Thank you very much. Okay, I think a motion is in order to accept the report.
So moved.
Second. And let's take a vote, please.
Fritz?
Thank you for your work. I am pleased with how it's going. I want to be very clear with the community and with city employees that our work is not done. We have definitely made a good start, and equity has started to become something that many more city employees and people in the community understand, embrace, and care passionately about, and do feel the urgency. There are still a lot for whom some or none of those is the case, and we must continue to intentionally engage the next mayor. I want to share your lauding of Mayor Hales and your leadership, Mayor Hales, of this Bureau over the last 4 years. It has come a long way, and there is still a long way to go. But one of the concerns when the community was engaging in 2010, 11, and 12 was that it would be like every other diversity and inclusion work that the city has done over the past 10, 20, 50 years, that it would come and go, and there wouldn't be any outcomes. And we are starting to see outcomes even this early. We have established the office, funded the office through the recession and through the recovery from the recession, and will continue to do so. So it is becoming institutionalized equity, starting to take over from institutionalized racism. I'm also especially pleased with the decision that we made to include disability as a secondary focus, and the work that the Commission on Disability has done, that your staff have done, and that everybody in the city has also embraced also, and the work that's being done in the bureaus to work on the transition plan and the specific physical things that need to be fixed. And while we're doing the moral imperatives and the philosophical and other discussions, which are not so easy to quantify, it's very satisfying to be able to check off and say, yes, at least we have changed the way the door handle works or whatever. And I thank all of your staff and all of the city bureaus who take those steps and then engage on the also difficult work of figuring out how do we become a model employer of people with disability, how do we work on all of the other issues that we need to do with a very small number of staff, which so then it does require engagement of everybody in the city. And so I thank you for your work, and yes, there's more to do.
Fish?
Director James, thank you for an excellent report. I'm going to hand this out to all my bureaus and all the folks that I have oversight of and say, the next time we do an annual report, I'd like it to look like this. And I should also say I apologize for poaching one of your team members.
Thank you. And she's here too, so I want to.
But that's equity in action.
Yes.
Equity is also a ladder and a ladder of opportunity. So thank you for your work. And, you know, I've had a chance to participate in a number of the forums that you've convened where you brought community members together. And it's very powerful. And we're all learning, and we're doing it in a collaborative way. And I love the stories in this report. I love the human component, the people piece. And as Commissioner Fritz said, we have a lot more work to do, but we are becoming more intentional. And there's another piece that we can do, which is through the relationship with our bureau directors, we can put very clear expectations in our annual letters. And that in turn translates to working with your bureau on implementation plans and then action plans. So I thank you for your good work, and I just also want to acknowledge that there was great skepticism about this enterprise, but there was a fierce champion in Commissioner Fritz that helped us initially with Mayor Adams launch this thing. And I appreciate the leadership of Mayor Hales as the commissioner in charge, and I fully would expect that the next mayor, whoever he or she is, picks this up and takes us to the next level. So thank you, sir. Aye.
Novick?
Thank you, Director James. Thanks for all the work your office does. I'm always particularly appreciative of the input in the budget process. And as you pointed out, the budget is how we express our values. So the work of the office and the budget process is critically important. I also want to thank you for this equity lens. And I think you said that, you don't want an equity lens to be a 1,000-pound monocle. You want it to be something we'd actually use. So this, I think, is great to have, and I'm going to keep it here on my desk permanently. Thank you very, very much. Aye.
Thank you.
Hill.
Well, Dante, thank you. First, I want to thank my colleague, Commissioner Fritz, for her leadership on this work, because that's why we're here. And two, you and your professional staff are first rate. And the fact that we're national leaders is perhaps in part due to policy at the council level, but it takes really effective people and leadership in the bureaus that has achieved what you've achieved so far, and that's great, and I'm proud of the work that you and your team are doing. I also want to thank the volunteers that serve in so many different ways, the Portland Commission on Disabilities, the Human Rights Commission, our diverse and empowered employees at Portland who give of their time to support this work. The Black Male Achievement Steering Committee, where we've recruited this amazing group of civic leaders from across the city to support the work. So like a lot of things in Portland that become institutionalized, like sustainability, it requires leadership at the council, it requires an effective bureau, but then it requires a lot of people in the community that are backing and supporting and enlivening that work. And that's exactly what we have going on with these amazing volunteers. So you're really adding a lot of value. And let me mention just 3 ways I think this work is adding value to the city. One, we're learning. It's a process. And each of us as city employees have had the opportunity or are having the opportunity to learn about equity, thanks to the training and the work that you do. I've learned as a privileged white male, I've learned that I am, although perhaps not to blame for racism, I am responsible for it. And that's true of all of us, that we have the chance to learn where we fit in the work of equity. And I've learned a lot from you and from your team, and I appreciate that. Secondly, it's empowering change. You mentioned the change in the consciousness of the Budget Office. I'm proud of the change in the culture and consciousness of the Police Bureau, which you've helped support. Also a work in progress. But when you see Chief O'Day and his leadership and the approach they take and the work that they're doing in both the community and in the Bureau to make that change, you understand that equity is becoming real in a place that it must become real. The most dire thing that we do, police our city. And then third and most pleasant is I get to see how this affects individual people in their careers and their opportunities. Ariel, I talked about Stefan Hartley last week, and as well as Ariel, the people that I've seen, young people that have had their careers and their opportunities enhanced through the work of this city and through the opportunities that we create to have, a young man in the community come forward as Khalid Bombek did and say, I've got this basketball team, I need a place to play, and have that lead to what we've done in the community centers. That, to me, is one of the greatest pleasures of leadership, is just seeing people grow and develop and exercise leadership on their own. And so if we become a more equitable city, we create more places where people can lead that way as citizens, and that's good work as well. So thank you all for work well done, much more to do. Aye. Thank you all. What a great report. Thank you. Let's suspend the rules, and thank you very much. Okay. All right, we're going to take one item out of order here, which is the item we pulled from consent, because I think we have somebody here from the Bureau who can be around for a minute to explain it, but not much longer. So let's take item 301, please.
Amend floating structures code to add administrative appeal provisions, revise external appeal board provisions to conform to the state building codes, add term limits to boards, delete obsolete provisions, and make other technical changes.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for taking this out of order. I have a demolition committee meeting at 12:30.
Yes.
Back to the office. So basically, this ordinance is similar to what I brought forth with all of the other ordinances that BDS, administers. It's it's codifying the existing provisions for appeals. Floating structures was a little bit different from the others because it had two separate appeal boards, and so with the work of the River Community Advisory Committee, we're just combining those two into one. They've never met anyway, but it didn't make any sense. It was almost the exact same players in both of those boards, and so it just, is consolidating those. And then there's a couple of other, technical changes that the River Community and our inspection staff put in there.
Any questions for Nancy? I know we had someone that wanted to speak on this item, so that's the primary reason it got pulled. So I just wanted to have a quick explanation, which you've given us. Thank you. Why don't you stand by in case we have any others after we hear from people.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So who wanted to speak on this item? Come on up, please. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Lightning. I represent Lightning Watchdog PDX. One of the reasons why I pulled this item is I don't think we've stressed enough some of the issues on these floating homes and when we want to move these in several locations. One of the concerns I have, and I want to have this addressed and watched very close, is that when you move these floating homes, say if it's in a current marina, I want to make sure that these plumbing, sewer connections are watched very closely. Also, when you disconnect the electrical and you move the floating home within a marina, I also want to have a licensed electrician hooking these back up. I want to make it very clear. I do not like to see when you don't want to have certain permits pulled to be able to do this. I think it's imperative because we're talking, again, environmental concerns. If we're not hooking up the sewer connections properly, and again, we're talking electrical, which isn't just the fact that the floating homes do move on the water and those connections can bust loose if they're not put on properly. And again, when that happens, if those lines drop into the water, anybody swimming in that general location has the ability to get electrocuted. It is imperative that when these are moved, that the proper inspectors come and inspect these floating homes. In this current agreement, you're saying that is not necessary. You're saying that they will have exemptions and not have to do that. I absolutely disagree with your ordinance this time due to the environmental concerns, due to the safety concerns on proper electrical hookups, and due to the fact that if anybody is swimming near these floating homes and those lines do become disconnected, it poses a risk to shock the swimmers in the water. It is absolutely necessary to have the proper permits, the proper inspections, and I want to start seeing that these floating homes are inspected on a regular basis by harbor masters. I want to see the reports in place. I want to make sure that all sewer systems are hooked up properly, all pumps are tested, all tanks are looked at, and to have an understanding where they're having these tanks pumped, if they're having them pumped, or if they're using traditional sewer lines going up into the sewer system. It's imperative to understand these floating homes should be inspected more aggressively than a home on land. And that's my position. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Nancy, why don't you come back up for a second? So the concern I think Mr. Lightning has raised is about this provision that says the certificate of compliance is not required when you move a structure from one slip to another in the same moorage. So is that the loophole that we're concerned about here?
I guess that's what he's addressing, but they still always have to comply with all of the requirements for the electrical and the plumbing code. Those are,
You still have to get an electrical permit to connect to the electrical system?
yeah, I mean, you can't, you just don't have to get a specific certificate of compliance to move it. They were trying to distinguish between moving from one slip to another versus one moorage to another.
But no matter what, if you disconnect a floating home from an electrical service and then you reconnect it to electrical service, an electrical inspection is going to be required, right?
That's my understanding.
Okay, same thing with plumbing?
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Let's make sure of that. This
Okay,
comes back
sure.
for second reading next week, so why don't you verify that for us?
Okay, I
That's
will
a
do
very
that.
legitimate concern, so.
Okay, sure.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Can I speak on this before
Sure,
you go?
sure, come on up. Thank you.
For the record, my name is Joe Walsh. I represent Individuals for Justice. One of our concerns is we have homeless people living on the river. Does this include this group of people that are on boats?
No, this is about floating structures, which are under the state building code.
Okay, so the people that are on the river living on boats, because they have no other place to go, are not going to be affected by anything in this ordinance.
No, I don't believe not.
That's good news. That makes me smile. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions? Okay, this passes to second reading. Then why don't you get back to us on that question, that technical question? And then let's move on to our other time certain item, please, 293. And do you want 294 read together with that? Yeah. Not necessarily? Okay.
Well, actually, yes, although,
Okay.
and then it could ask to have 294 postponed until next week.
Okay, well, let's read 293 and 294.
293, create a local transportation infrastructure charge to fund improvements to unimproved streets.
Commissioner Novick.
Colleagues, I am excited as all get out about this little item, so I'm going to hold forth a little longer than I normally will. There's a lot of people in this country who think that government could mess up a one-car parade, that the government is always wasteful, inefficient, and silly. And I and all of us here are not in that camp. We believe the government normally does a pretty darn good job with limited resources. But those of us who defend government, I think, have a special obligation to, when we see something government's doing that actually is silly, to correct it. For a number of years, we have been doing something silly when there is a new development on a street without a curb. In too many cases, we choose between two unsavory options. We might tell the developer, you have to build a curb and a sidewalk in front of this new house, even though will be an orphan sidewalk with no prospect that there will ever be an additional curb or sidewalk along the rest of the street. Or we say to the developer, you know what, you've convinced us this will be an orphan sidewalk, so we're not going to make you pay anything. We're going to let you off the hook entirely, except that we'll put in a provision that if there is ever a move to form an LID along this street, your property will be treated as voting for the LID, which in the vast majority of cases is utterly meaningless because people don't form LIDs very often. And usually the person who actually buys the home might see something in the disclosure forms but doesn't know that they're committed to vote for an LID. So 3 years ago, I think actually even before I was given the privilege of being assigned to PBOT, I had a conversation about this issue with folks interested in it, including folks at PBOT. And the folks at PBOT said, we know that this is silly, and we would like to do something about it. And the logical thing to do is to have the developer pay a fee that goes into a pot that's then saved and used for community priorities in the area, improvements that people really think can be done and should be done. Now, there's a perfect example of this phenomenon within about 2 blocks of my own house. I live on 36, the quiet residential street in Southwest that frankly gets along just fine without a sidewalk. But 2 blocks away, there's a new little development with a strip of curb and sidewalk in front of it that leads to nowhere. Now, a block east of us is 35th, which is a major street which connects the village with Vermont, which then goes down to Hillsdale, which is a busy street, and I see kids walking along it, and it worries me that they're walking in a ditch, and there should be a sidewalk there. So in a logical world, the money spent to build this tiny piece of floating sidewalk on my quiet residential street should have been put into a pot to save the day when we could build sidewalks along 35th. So I thought that this was a big deal when I heard about it. And PBOT folks explained to me that they wanted to work on it, but it would take some resources and some time to come up with a proposal that would be legally and economically and politically defensible. And PBOT had not previously had the political commitment from folks like us to really do the work that needed to be done on this process. So once I was assigned PBOT, I said, okay, well, let's do it. Let's devote the time and the resources to coming up with something. So we have come up with something. It's a beginning, it's not an end, but it's something significant. What we have here is a proposal that in circumstances like this, developers will pay a fee that goes into a pot for future significant improvements. And that means that we will stop doing the silly thing that we've been doing to date, which is choosing between floating sidewalks and letting developers off the hook. Now, there's a lot of questions that remain to be answered, such as what is the geographic limitation going to be on how far away from the original development the money can be spent? Should it be in that neighborhood association, in that neighborhood coalition, within half a mile, regardless of what neighborhood is involved? That's something that we haven't worked out yet. Another thing we want to work out is what other sources of revenue, public or private, do we expect might ordinarily be used to supplement the money from this fee to build specific projects? That we haven't worked out either. There's a bunch of stuff we haven't worked out, which is why we propose to engage Eco Northwest, which has been working with us lo these many months, to continue doing that kind of work, which will involve a significant amount of public outreach. And that's what item 294 is, which we're going to save for next week. But we want to keep the emergency clause on it because the work needs to go forward. What 293 is basically a proposal with buy-in from a large number of stakeholders to stop doing the silly thing. We will figure out how smart we can be in future months. Right now, what I propose is that we simply stop being silly. And I want to thank our stakeholder work group, which is a virtual hall of fame among stakeholders in the city. Mary Ann Fitzgerald, Mary Helen Kincaid of DRAC, Jacob Sherman of the Brentwood Darlington Neighborhood Association, Dan Vizzini, former LID administrator, Justin Wood, of Fish Construction, Vic Remmers, Neil Fernando of Everett Homes and Embryo Design, respectively, Jane Leo of the Portland Metropolitan Association of Realtors, Christine Leone of PBOT, Kurt Kruger of PBOT, and Sue Williams of BES. So, with that introduction, I'm going to, maybe I should mention, we are going to have an amendment that, and I think this is Commissioner Fritz's suggestion, that the money that we collect under this fee, before we figured out exactly how, another thing we haven't figured out is exactly what the prioritization process will be like for projects the money is used for, won't be spent until we figured out these other items. It will go into, as Darrell Hammond, mimicking Al Gore, would have said on Saturday Night Live in 2000 during the presidential election, the money will go into a lockbox. So we have a lockbox amendment to propose. And with that, I will turn it over to Christine and Kurt.
Good morning.
Wow, good morning.
That introduction.
I don't think I need to say anything after that. That was excellent. So, good morning. My name is Christine Leon, and I'm the Development Permitting and Transit Group Manager for PBOT. And with me today is Kurt Kruger, who is our Development Review Manager. And then you will be joined later by our Eco Northwest consulting team. So I'm very, very pleased to offer you today two items that are related to our new concept, which is our local transportation infrastructure charge. So this is a new option for developers on certain types of roads that will be available to them. It's a simple, predictable option that has the support of our stakeholders group. It has the support of our Development Review Advisory Committee, some of which will be here today testifying in support. But essentially, this new LTIC is what we're calling it, is available to a small but mighty group of developers. So you have to be a single-family infill development, a new development of that type, on a local service road, and it has to be on one of our problem streets. And our problem streets are classified as those that are unimproved, without pavement, without curbs. So we have established this as, again, a very simple, straightforward method to get to development for housing quicker and faster. It was asked for a number of years, but it took a long time to get here due to the complexity of the issues. And I want to just say that with the support of the mayor and Commissioner Novick, we are able to reach this milestone today, but also recognize that in 2012, commissioners Fritz and Salzman and Fish gave us overwhelming support and encouragement through the Street by Street project and projects like the Cully Plan to continue to look at alternatives to get development to happen quickly and effectively, and encouraged us to come up with a fee then. So this will build on a process also that council has heard through the Tryon Stevens project of determining what type of street standards apply, where, and when. So our stakeholders group has been in partnership with the Bureau of Environmental Services, the City Attorney's Office, and the members that Commissioner Novick has mentioned. So I'm not going to continue on that piece anymore. I will mention, though, that our resources for improving residential streets from PBOT is very, very constrained. And in most circumstances, the adjacent property owner is funding the bulk of the improvements on these streets. Our grants generally don't cover these from ODOT or the feds. So this is a new option that also has the support and endorsement of the City Budget Office Director, Andrew Scott, who's here today in case you want to hear any more about our budget constraints. I would also like to add that the director for the Water Bureau, Mike Sturr, who has been a longstanding member of the Public Works Appeal Board, is fully in support of this option as well. The second item that we have on the agenda is a contract modification to allow Echo Northwest to engage in a very, very robust process with the community to come up with the answers on where the LTIC money should be spent, how and where it should be spent. And this process will be going through a consideration of what do we do with these existing 10,000 or more waivers that we have recorded against properties. So where the street standards apply to which streets, where the money should be spent and prioritized, and how the neighborhood streets in general are going to be funded with our limited resources. So now I would like to turn it over to Kurt Kruger. He's going to illustrate the problem, and then he will be followed by Terry Moore and Nick Papanuk from Echo Northwest, who are going to get into more details about the fee. There's also, I guess I should mention, there's a handout that Carla has that addressed some of the comments that we had from an earlier meeting from Commissioner Fritz. Not sure if that was handed out.
Yep.
It's separate from the amendment. It's a.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I don't know if I have that.
We don't have monitor capacity this morning, so I don't know if you have handouts of what you're showing to everybody else, but we can't see it. It's not working. There we go.
There we go.
There we go. Okay.
So I'm not sure if you would like me to read the amendment that's proposed? Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
So the proposed amendment is, in addition to what's written, item sub B, PBOT shall keep funds collected by this charge in a separate fund and not spent until the completion of the next phase of the project and the results are presented to City Council.
Okay, so Commissioner Novick moves that amendment. Is there a second?
Second?
I'd like to propose an amendment to the amendment.
Okay.
First of all, it's interesting that it's in the code rather than somewhere else, but I would strike the results are presented to and change that to the allocation methodology is approved by the City Council.
You regard that as a friendly amendment, Commissioner Novick? Not necessarily.
Dan, what do you think?
I was just going to make a clarification. The ordinance has the subsection A as the code modification. This would not be a code change.
Okay.
This is just a council directs.
Okay,
So
good.
So
So then changing it, I don't want more than just the results are presented and I accept the report. I'd like the allocation methodology specific to be approved by the City Council.
yes, I think that's fine. We intend to come back with that. Yeah.
Thank you.
I would regard that as a friendly amendment, Commissioner Novick, because I think under state SDC law, we probably have to do that. So
But
It's not an SDCC.
It's not a, not an
It's not an
SDCC.
This is not an
Kurt, you look
SDCC.
worried.
I'm good.
All right. Smile, smile.
Okay, all right, did you have anything else, Commissioner Fritz?
Yes, we had also discussed, when I got the briefing from staff on Monday, or yesterday, whenever it was, about continuing to have waivers of remonstrance.
Okay, but what, in terms of the amendment?
This is another amendment, though, so, okay, well, let's vote on this amendment first.
That amendment, as modified by Commissioner Fritz's suggestion, discussion of accepting that amendment. Let's take a roll call on that, please.
Fritz?
Aye.
Aye.
Schultzman?
Aye.
Novick?
Aye.
Hales?
Aye, okay, and did you have another suggestion? Either.
Well, there's the issue of waivers of remonstrance. I see that Southwest Neighborhoods has a request to amend the word zone to insert or issued a waiver of remonstrance. There's also, I believe that even though this fee is being paid, if the street ever is improved, those homes should be waivered.
Well, I had that question too, so we may want to take testimony on that point, but by doing this, are we going to stop
Yes.
requiring waivers?
The intent was.
So this was part of our stakeholders group debate as to whether or not we should continue or stop with the waivers. And after meeting with Commissioner Fritz, we went back and considered the impact of it. And there is not an issue with continuing to do waivers because it's
Not a problem with it.
Yeah. So we would propose to require the payment of the fee in addition to a waiver of remonstrance be recorded against the property, consistent with what our current practice is if the frontage is not brought up to standard. Because if a local improvement district is formed, and this is something that we're going to sort through in the phase 3, that waiver really obligates that property to not remonstrate formally against the formation of an LID. The LID assessment methodology is the second piece of an LID where we would be considering what the LTIC was paid by this developer. Because again, it's a developer fee, but we don't have any intent of double dipping on these properties. So yes, we can certainly continue to require the waivers of remonstrance.
So financially, in that approach, financially, they would get credit for having paid the LTIC, but they would be counted as a vote in favor of the LID if it were if it was going through the process of being voted on.
That's certainly, yes, Mayor, one way that it would be able to play out as we
That
look
sounds
at
like
it
a
in phase
topic
3.
we ought to hear. I mean, we're here for
Yeah.
people anyway, but I'd like to hear testimony on that as well.
And we'll need, I presume, an amendment on that. If you could also specifically look at the requested language from Southwest Neighborhoods to see when you come back next week with new language, if we can incorporate that too.
All right. So Kurt, you want to proceed with anything else? Or?
I'm just thinking into procedurally, if we think we might consider such an amendment, would we, and we don't have the language until next week, will we need to put off the final vote for 2 weeks? Or can we put that conceptual amendment on the table today without the language? Or what should we do to be most efficient?
Well,
Can we
I
add an
guess it
emergency
depends on the
clause?
speed on which you want to act on this. Knowing that this problem's been around for decades, I'm not sure that another week is going to make a difference, but I understand the desire to get things done. So, suggestion?
I think it's better to go ahead and have the amendment on the table.
Okay. So, all right, so maybe later in this morning's discussion, if somebody has language, we could put that on the table and accept it.
Mayor, could I ask you just a scheduling issue?
Yeah, we're time crunch here.
We have a lot before us, and we have a lot of staff that just need to be, to get a heads up. And my hope is that you're going to have us continue through about 1 o'clock.
That's my thought, that we will break at 1.
And then whatever is left, we'll pick up at 2.
If anything left, we'll take it up at 2.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Okay, carry on.
Good morning, Mayor Hills, Council. Kurt Kruger with PBOT. Before I get going, I'll be brief. It just feels a little awkward being here describing a process that we've been doing that's called silly. So it feels a little strange.
It's okay.
Making
Carlo,
that
excuse me a second,
acknowledge-
Carlo, we lost our PowerPoint again, so.
As you are aware, development patterns have changed in the last 30 to 40 years, and I want to leave this slide up for a minute just to kind of recognize that change has been occurring in our city. Large subdivision developments have been replaced by smaller scale infill, particularly in the areas annexed into the city with under or unimproved roadways. As infill development has started to occur more frequently, a number of years ago, a regulatory tool was established through the use of requiring a developer to sign a waiver of remonstrance and record with the county to run with the property. This waiver of remonstrance was essentially a vote of support from the property for the formation of a local improvement district. The waiver of remonstrance wasn't a waiver of development requirements, but a deferral until a majority of waivers were collected and an LID could be formed to design and construct an entire street segment at one time. The waiver of remonstrance was a great tool to allow infill development and then allow the city and residents to more efficiently design, build, and pay for improvements, particularly because there were improvement programs such as community block grants to help subsidize those improvement costs. As these subsidies disappeared, the city was left with few options to improve the many miles of unimproved roads. PBOT moved to require more half-street improvements as infill projects, relying on a piecemeal approach to complete our street networks where physically and legally possible. While not perfect by any stretch, an expectation was established that development would construct the improvements, and over time, the system would be completed. While this approach has worked in larger commercial and industrial areas of the city with much greater street frontages, it has become increasingly more difficult to develop full street improvements once residential development at the time. Additional regulations, including changes to stormwater requirements in the early 2000s and more challenging and constitutional rulings from the high courts, have further hampered our ability to require these improvements. Additionally, our public works permitting processes were developed to review and permit much larger scale street improvements and have made permitting small infill projects increasingly more expensive. In 2009, we overhauled our permitting processes and created a more robust public works appeals process to deal with the challenges associated with infill improvements. This has unfortunately added delays, costs, and frustrations for many. This frustration has been reported on over the years as both residents and developers have approached the media. What we were recommending is the adoption of a fee program that has had support of many infill builders that have simply been asking to write a check to the city and let the city figure out how and where best to make those improvements. For those who have been close to this issue for a while now, this is the third and most exhaustive attempt to develop a program that you're going to hear more about in greater detail from our consulting team. I want to acknowledge that this is not a complete and final solution, and it will not solve every infill development street need, but it is a monumental step in the right direction, and if approved, will provide us with a tool that we have needed in our toolbox for many, many years. I want to thank Commissioner Novick for his support of this effort. And I want to thank you to the thoughtful and dedicated stakeholder members that have been helpful in guiding us along the way in this effort. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Christina Kurt. Okay, thank you very much. I know you have some invited testimony.
Actually, we do. Actually, may I ask a question related to this amendment concept? And I'm making this up on the fly, which is dangerous, but I'm wondering, looking at the ordinance Exhibit A, would the appropriate thing to do be under Section B, where now the language says the payment of a local transportation infrastructure charge will satisfy the requirements of this subsection? Should we amend that to say the payment of a local transportation infrastructure charge and a commitment to waive the right of remonstrance for future LID? Would that be where you put that in?
I think,
Why don't you consider that?
yeah.
Think about that when
We'll
we
take a look
listen
at
to
that.
it. Good otherwise.
Okay, so Terry Moore and Nick Papanuck are going to come up next from Echo Northwest.
Okay, great, thank you. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners. I'm Terry Moore at Echo Northwest. I'm one of the three founding principals. We're a Portland-based consulting firm in economics and finance planning. We've been around for about 40 years. Working with us on this project were Communitas, Deb Myhoff, who did the work with the stakeholder engagement, and Kittleson Associates that did the work on some of the transportation cost estimating. Let me move on to my part of the presentation here. Kirk gets credit for that one. So here, Nick and I'm here with Nick Popenook. We're going to do 4 things. First, give you a broad overview of the problem, which I think has already been covered pretty well by the previous speakers. Then talk about how this charge that we're talking about fits in. Then Nick will go into the details of that charge, and I will talk at the end about what the next phase of the work would be. So start with what are problem streets. Lots of ways to define it, but a couple of things to start with. We're talking about only local streets, so we're not talking about arterials, collectors, or what you might refer to as busy streets. It's neighborhood type streets. So when we talk about the problem, we're not talking about congestion as a problem typically. We're talking about the state of repair and certain things that come from that as a set of the problems. The local streets are, by our estimates, about 45% of all your streets. So that's the base that we're working from. What makes a street a problem? Well, the first thing is that they are unpaved. And about 2% of the city's streets are unpaved. That's about 40 miles of streets. Another way that they can be, we've classified them as a problem, is that they are without curbs, which creates drainage problems. And it doesn't mean that they just don't have curbs. It means that they don't have the drainage system that the curbs are taking the water into. So that's about 12% of all your streets, or another 250 miles. About half of those streets are in poor condition, and the other half are in fair condition. So in our definition, it's still a problem street, even if the pavement is in fair condition, if it does not have a curb. We do not include in the definition the paved with a curb. So that means regardless of the condition of the curb or the pavement. So if it's got a curb, we're assuming drainage, and the charge would not apply to that. When we sum all that up, this is a diagram of what we've got. The part on the right are what we're calling the local streets, and of those local streets, you can see the ones that we're calling unimproved or problem streets. That's about 14% of all the city's streets, or roughly 285 miles of streets. The problem with problem streets is there are 4 categories. First, you've got physical problems. It makes travel slower, more difficult. There's potential safety issues. There's wear and tear issues, drainage, and amenity issues. Put sidewalk in that category. The second problem is the scope of the fix. The money that you have to fix those from existing sources is small, very small relative to the size of the problem. And as Nick will point out, this charge that we're talking about is still a small part of the problem. We'll still address a small part of the problem. The third problem, Kurt's already talked about administrative issues relating to permitting waivers and how development moves along. And the fourth problem is a political one. This is a longstanding issue, as Commissioner Novick noted, that this has been around not for weeks or months or years, but really for decades. And it creates problems for the neighborhoods, both residents and property owners, and for the city council. The problem is widespread. It is not as one might have assumed, I did before we started, an eastern problem. It is pretty much evenly dispersed on the east side and the west side. We've done estimates of sub-areas, census tract data by income. It's spread out across income classes. So it affects, it's a pretty ecumenical Catholic problem. It gets everybody. Trying to solve the problem, it's a long road, and we're taking a first step. With almost 300 miles of roads to deal with, by our estimates, it's over $1 billion of improvements to just deal with those roads. So there are lots of trade-offs and choices here about what improvements do you do first? What standards do you use under what conditions? All that is not resolved yet. We've taken the first step, as Commissioner Novick said, to stop something silly and see if we can at least get to some charge. And that's the second part of the presentation that I want to go to then is, how does this charge fit in? We call it for short, the LTIC, the Local Transportation Improvement Charge. So there are four things there that it addresses. First is the fairness issue. There's now new development that goes in and pays nothing, goes through a waiver process on these streets, and some development actually puts in the improvements. If you go farther, there are developments outside of these areas that are being required to put in improvements, so developers are treated differently. That's a fairness issue. There are funding issues. Depending on the economy, this fee will generate on the order of $1 million or $2 million, maybe more dollars per year based on the kind of development that's been happening in recent years. So now there's money to start to do something. There's an efficiency issue. The big efficiency issue is the one already pointed out. Building these disconnected improvements is not really a good use of funds. There's more, it's inefficient for developers in many cases. With the process that they go through and the appeals process and not knowing how things are going to work out, there's a lack of clarity and certainty. And that reflects on staff time trying to deal with those issues as well. And finally, there's why start with the LTIC as a momentum issue. This is a big problem. We couldn't deal with everything at once. We decided with Commissioner Novick's advice and blessing to try to bite off one piece and see if we could get somewhere, and that was getting this charge taken care of. So that's where we are right now, and now Nick will explain the charge to you.
Actually, Terry, may I just correct you? I remember we talked about this a few weeks ago, and I said, but what about this, and what about that, and what about the other thing? And you said, I thought that your priority was to stop doing the silly thing first. And I said, you're right. Let's do that.
Okay, Council, my name is Nick Popenook. I'm with Echo Northwest. I will try to move quickly through the details of the local transportation infrastructure charge. Commissioner Novick, Christine, Kurt, and Terry have all explained why this is a problem, why we need the LTIC. I'm here to tell you how it would work. So first, very briefly, just to restate, there are existing improvements that development already has that says that they need to improve the frontage of their property. What we are proposing is not a new requirement, but a different way of satisfying that existing requirement. And this new option, the LTIC, is only available to a small slice of development that happens in the city. We're talking about new construction of single-family homes. And again, this would be optional. The developers, the fee applies to everyone, but if you make the decision as a developer that you would rather build improvements on your property, you put it into the code, and now you have the street and sidewalk and curb built to code, then the LTIC is no longer applying to you. Folks have talked all about stakeholder input. I won't belabor that point. I will say that we did have outreach efforts to the individual neighborhood associations and coalitions that are particularly affected by these types of problem streets. We had representatives of our team meet with the Sweeney Land Use Commission, the East Portland Land Use Committee, the North Portland Land Use Committee, as well as the Home Builders Association Infill Developer Group. We also extended invitations to meet with other groups such as the East Portland Neighborhood Office, Central Northeast Neighbors, and Southeast Uplift. Some of those groups didn't take us up on the invitation to meet with them, largely because they're more interested in the next phase of this project, where we're actually discussing, okay, what now? There is a pot of money that's being generated. Where should we spend that money? What kind of streets? And what other funding sources can be brought to bear to really start to make tangible improvements in our communities? So where the LTIC would apply, again, we are talking about single-family zones, local service streets, and unimproved streets, which we have defined as any street that does not already have a curb in place. There was a very sort of large discussion about what we want to define as unimproved streets. Do we want to have a sliding scale where we have a certain fee for just unpaved roads? Do we want to have another fee if it's paved but doesn't have a curb? What if it's paved and has a curb but no sidewalk? At the end of the day, after consulting with the stakeholder work group, the city attorney's office, and key stakeholders, it was decided that this approach, this simple, clear approach, one fee that applies to everybody who's on an unimproved street, defined as not having a curb, was the best way forward. Again, this doesn't solve all of our problems on all streets, but we do think this is an important first step on these streets.
But it has to be all three of those, right?
Yes, has to be no curb, single-family residential zone, and a local service street. When the LTIC applies, the simple answer is a building permit for a new single-family home or a permit for a land division. There are a couple of caveats that I want to note. First, when we talk about some fees and charges that happen on development, if there's a demolition of a home and then a replacement of that home, sometimes they don't pay the fee because of the impacts that are being assessed. That's not the case with the LTIC. This is a charge. It's a charge on development. If you're building a home, regardless of what used to be on that site, you are still going to be charged the LTIC. An exception to that would be if it's a disaster replacement. If someone has their home burned down in a fire and they're just replacing that home, we are not wanting to place any additional hardships on them in that situation. Additionally, accessory dwelling units, the administrative rules would propose that those are not included for the LTIC. The LTIC in many of those situations would cost as much or perhaps more than the accessory dwelling unit itself. And then one other thing to point out is alteration of existing structures. If you're remodeling or remodeling your kitchen, adding a new bedroom, we are not proposing that the LTIC would apply in those situations either. In terms of land division, this would not apply to subdivisions. Subdivision is defined as creating 4 lots or more. If you're creating a subdivision, then you would still have to go through the existing requirements of building those frontage improvements. The initial rate of the LTIC. I'm sure in the testimony today you will hear folks arguing that the initial rate should be higher and lower depending on their point of view. The rate that we have proposed is $600 per linear foot. We came up with this rate with the input from a transportation engineering firm, Kittleson and Associates. They reviewed all of the city's LID projects that had been built since 2004 and looked at the average costs of those projects over time. That includes the costs of street, curb, stormwater, all of the typical components of a street. They excluded excessive costs that were for related projects, but not the direct impact of building a street. For example, if you were going to go in and upsize a stormwater or regular water or sanitary sewer pipe that was traveling through that right of way, and you said, well, since we're paving this, we might as well upsize that pipe. Those kind of costs were excluded from the analysis. What we found is that the average cost of those improvements, when adjusted for inflation, is $600 per linear foot. And the code language that you have in front of you says that the amount of the charge should be based on the average actual cost to the city to build local street improvements. So it's a mathematical calculation and not just a number that was pulled out of the air. The code language also allows for this amount of the charge to increase over time. The administrative rules that will be drafted will propose that there are annual adjustments based purely on inflation on the construction cost index, but that periodically, every 5 years or so, the city would undertake a new sort of rate study in which they would look at all of the new streets that had been built and see what those costs were, and they would make adjustments to the amount of the fee to ensure that it stays tracking what the actual construction costs are for these sorts of projects. One thing to point out is that the code language does allow for multiple zones of the LTIC, where each zone would have a different rate. We are proposing that we would create 2 zones, but that each of those zones would start off with the same initial rate. A lot of this conversation came from talking to some of our stakeholders who said, hang on a second, in my neighborhood, I think these streets are going to cost more to build. And we drilled down into that and said, what is it about your neighborhood that makes you think that the streets are going to be more expensive? And the answer was almost always stormwater management. That is something that we anticipate will be an issue. But as we looked at the historical data, there was not enough information, enough projects that had been built in these different geographic areas to clearly delineate what the cost would be in one area from another. Just not enough examples to come up with a statistically significant difference in those. Over time, as we're able to build more streets and we have more data on this issue, we do anticipate that we might see some differences in the costs in these different areas and that we'd be able to distinguish the rate between them in the future. The different areas that we are proposing, we didn't want to create new custom-made zones that, we're the ones saying that we think this block is going to be more expensive than that block. Instead, the city already has areas that are defined as the Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System, or MS4. That's an EPA deal that has to do with how stormwater is treated and where it does or doesn't infiltrate into the soils. That's the map that's shown on the slide, and you can see that mostly in southwest Portland, but also parts of the east side of Portland and North Portland do have some of these MS4 areas. And so we are anticipating over time that there may be a separate rate of the LTIC that would be applied to those MS4 areas if, in fact, construction costs turn out to show a difference between those areas. Lastly, on the use of funds, we know this was an amendment, but it was always the intention that the improvements would be used on unimproved local streets and adjacent and related transportation facilities, but that the money would not be spent until after the next phase of the project has been completed. So I think that that amendment to the proposed ordinance is exactly in line with what the staff and the consultant team had always envisioned, which is that until we finish this next phase of the project, until the public has had a chance to weigh in on exactly what their priorities are, and we've looked at the different revenue sources that are available and how we might start to actually fund improvements, that the fund would be put, or the funds would be put into a lockbox to keep them safe and to keep track of who paid them and where, so that when we do have rules for where we want to spend these, we can go back and invest those into the communities where the funds came from. So I'll turn it over to Terry for a very quick piece on the next phase of the project.
Yeah. Said we talk about 4 pieces. The 4th piece is this one, the next phase, and I'll do that in just one slide. The next part of the program has 4 important components to it. The technical components are the first 3, which is what are the standards that we're going to use? The size of this problem is such that it's almost certainly going to, if we're going to solve it, even over a long period of time, 20 or 30 years, it's almost certainly going to require some sophistication about what streets get treated in what different ways, because to do everything to what I'll call full typical standards is, as we pointed out, a $1 to $2 billion bite, which is more than what we think is appropriate. So the city has alternative standards. They're not in use much now. We're going to start with those as a place to work from. Then the question becomes, now that we know what standards might apply, we've got a limited pot of funds. How do we know where do we go first? And so there's a prioritization process, which is part of our plan. We have several ideas about that came up during the first phase of the project. I can go into those under question later if you want to. And then where does the funding come from? Not just the source that we're talking about, not just the LTIC, but what other sources of funds are going to come into that? How can they be leveraged, et cetera? All of that is roughly a little more than half of the budget for the project. The other 40 to 45% is the community involvement part, and that includes a couple of random sample statistically valid surveys, about 10 different focus groups, public events, and then the typical communication websites and things like that.
Can I jump in and just pose a question here, Commissioner Novick? I know we're not supposed to jump ahead and talk about that next phase, but since you mentioned the word leverage, I just want to just put a marker down. Commissioner Novick and I, on behalf of PBOT, Bureau of Environmental Services, and the Water Bureau, have been holding meetings discussing how can we better coordinate our work. The ultimate example of leverage is making sure that one of us doesn't do a project followed by another one coming along and digging it up and doing it again and the like. And so the challenge will be that if you look at leverage depending on how you define leverage, it may not meet an equity screen, or it may not necessarily be viewed as fair to people that put the money in the pot, or it may bump up against geographical boundaries and other things. So that's going to be a real challenge. But when you do that second phase, I really want to drill down on the leverage in terms of the coordination of city bureaus. And we're on the cusp of doing things a little differently. And this seems like a unique opportunity to institutionalize it into whatever phase 2 thinking you're doing. But there's trade-offs. And that even goes to the question of whether the money is spent proximate to the property that generated the fee, or there's more latitude to be opportunistic when you can do a bigger project with perhaps broader community benefits. So I just want to make sure that's front and center on phase 2.
It definitely is, Commissioner. All the points that you're talking about are ones that we've talked about and part of the things that we'll be addressing.
Okay, great. Questions?
I'll have some questions later, but I really want to get to public testimony first.
All right, well, let's do that. Thank you
One-
both very
one
much.
question.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
So I guess, maybe it's none of my business, but since we're given a detailed breakdown of your expenses for public involvement, why do we need 2 citywide polls? I mean, this is a pretty narrow issue. 2% of streets are affected. I mean, what are we going to gain from 2 citywide public opinion polls for $55,000?
They're not citywide. I mean, well, it depends on what you mean by that. They are focused in the areas that we're talking about that are where these fees might be charged. And the issue that we're trying to deal with, as we look back historically, of really study after study of real disagreement on whether what's the purpose of the street? Do I need a street? Have I already paid for that street? I want this standard, I want that standard. And we want the conclusion among the staff, the consultants, and the stakeholder group was that we wanted some more statistical validity than the usual, than just coming back to the same people all the time and hearing from them. So we've got one when we're going out with to go out and get clear on the definition of the problem, what people are concerned about, what types of things they'd like resolved, and then a second one to come back after we've got some ideas about prioritization standards, et cetera, to get opinions about that. That's the purpose, and certainly a debatable point about whether that would be necessary
Yeah, I
or
mean,
not.
I guess, as we all know, this issue's been around for decades. I don't think there's a lot of stuff that you call a typical person, and they're really gonna, I think a majority are gonna have no opinion or don't know. And I think, we're poised to make some decisions here, and it just seems excessive to me to have to do 2 rounds of public opinion polling, but.
Commissioner, I respectfully disagree. I think that it is worthwhile asking the general public questions like, do you think that any project has to be within, 6 blocks of where the improvement is made, or do you think that we should have a wider focus? Like, one of the questions actually that we asked in polling on the gas tax was, do you think that the money should be evenly divided between different neighborhoods, or should it go to the neighborhoods where it's needed most, even if that means your neighborhood doesn't get its quote share? And I think that's the kind of question it's important to ask, because there's a limited number of people that get involved in these discussions on a regular basis, but I think that there's a wider variety of people that will care about how we resolve it.
Other questions? Thank you very much. Do you have invited testimony, Steve, or do you?
Officially, we don't.
A bunch of people here to do
One idea that actually Kurt and Eric suggested is we might ask the members of the stakeholder advisory group to become invited testimony and come up first.
Sure, let's do that, and then take anyone else, please. So those of you who are on the Stakeholders Advisory Committee that want to come speak, come on up, please. Good afternoon.
Well, hello, I'm Mary Ann Fitzgerald from Southwest Neighborhoods, and yes, I was a member of the Stakeholder Advisory Committee. Sweeney submitted a letter yesterday that I hope you all have received by now. We have in Southwest Portland the least improved street network in the city of Portland. With all the equity discussions, it's impossible to live in Southwest Portland in a wheelchair or a walker. You have no sidewalks to be able to get to what little transit service that we have. We know that it's expensive to build sidewalks in Southwest Portland because it triggers the stormwater requirements. It can be as much as half of the cost of building sidewalks. And because it's more cost-effective to build sidewalks in other parts of the city, we frequently see the funding for sidewalk and street improvements go to elsewhere in the city and not in Southwest Portland. So we agree that this issue of issuing waivers of remonstrance is not working. We know that we've had a lot of infill in Southwest Portland, and we've had a large portion, I don't know exactly how much, but a large portion of the waivers are in Southwest Portland. Therefore, we get all the people moving in and all the cars, because you can't get around on a bike or by walking because you're forced to drive a car. It just perpetuates that cycle. So what we have agreed to among the Sweeney Board is conditionally supporting the local transportation charge. We know that having the charge is better than the current system, but we also have a lot of concerns about this next phase. And so in our letter, we've suggested quite a few changes. The first one is to amend the draft city code so that those that pay the LTIC also get the waivers of remonstrance, and I know that that's already on the table. And then the second one is that those that get a waiver on the busy streets also pay the fee. Now, staff tells me, oh, we don't give waivers on busy streets, but we know that they do. We've seen them on Capitol Highway, we've seen them on Taylor's Ferry Road, we've seen lots of waivers on busy streets. So in other words, you pay the LTIC, you get a waiver, you get the waiver, you pay the LTIC, hand in hand, no matter what. The third is a plea that the funds be spent within the area that they're generated, and we can argue about it. When I met with the other coalitions, we agreed on coalition area as a good possible geographic area. We talked about that at the stakeholder committee as well. And we're also pleading for a lot of community involvement because, as Terry Moore just said, there is some disagreement. I like my dirt road. I like no traffic on my road. Why would I want to improve it so cars can start using it as a cut through? And there's also the example that Commissioner Novick gave that where you have the sidewalk on a local street that's pretty walkable, but not on the busy street that you can't walk on very safely. We are pleased with the ordinance finding number 17 that allows the funds to be used on these adjacent or related transportation facilities and not just the local streets. In Southwest Portland, only 1/3 of our busy streets have sidewalks. That's 2/3 that are not walkable. And most of the people that I talk with agree we've got to target the funds towards some of these streets that will get you to the centers and exist on the corridors that you're going to adopt in the comprehensive plan. And we want to have some flexibility so we can target those improvements. And then finally, I appreciate Commissioner Fish's comments about the Bureau of Environmental Services. We know that there are very few LIDs in Southwest Portland because the cost of stormwater plus the street improvements blows the cost out of the water, and most people say no thank you. The ones like the Texas Street LID were done because of the BES paying for the stormwater improvements. So we're requesting that the BES contribute and fund the stormwater management components of the street improvements that also require the stormwater improvements. In other words, continue that partnership because we know that it will benefit water quality as well as walkability in Southwest Portland. So that's our Sweeney ask list, and I'm pleased to hear about these amendments that are being proposed today, and I'll be here to answer questions if you have them.
Thank you, Mary Ann.
I seem to remember that Southwest Neighborhoods came up with a prioritized list of where we would like where you would like street improvements.
Yes, many years ago, Mayor Adams, I think he was Commissioner Adams at the time, talked with us about sidewalk infill on arterials. And we came up with one for every neighborhood. And we've had 6 of them built. We still have a list that's been sitting on the back burner. Under the Southwest Corridor Plan, we submitted priorities in our neighborhoods. We're still waiting to begin the SWIM Southwest in Motion project. It hasn't begun yet, but there is no shortage of prioritized lists. We send them over and over again.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Justin Wood. I'm a residential infill home builder here in the city of Portland. With our company name is Fish Construction. I again also served on the stakeholder committee. I wanted to testify today in support of the LTIC. I have sat on all three of the committees that worked on this and took stabs at them. We've had I remember having meetings in Mayor Adams' office, I think 6 or 7 years ago, where we tried to come up with a solution to this. And every time we kind of got close, there was always a roadblock that came up that we couldn't get past. So I think staff and Echo Northwest has done a really good job in trying to come up with something that works for everybody. From a builder's perspective, for those of you who haven't heard, we can have a single lot, maybe even only a 25-watt lot or a 30-foot wide lot that would trigger frontage improvements that might cost thousands of dollars, and on top of that also take months, and I mean, it could be 10 months, 12 months, a year to get through the process, when the building permit itself might only take 6 weeks to get through the process. So unfortunately, our system of asking for street improvements is designed for large-scale subdivisions. It's just not meant for single lots. And so putting this charge in place gives us an option. It is important to memorize to notice for all of us that it is still optional. The builder always has the right to do the improvements, and there may be some situations where they want to improve their street because it makes more sense to have it, or if you've got 150 feet of frontage, that it may be cheaper for you to actually put the improvements in. You may hear some testimony talking about the fee being either too high or too low. I will say from when I took this to the group of infill builders, their initial reaction was that the fee was too high. But then I made the case after using the data that Kittleson provided that it actually was a fair number. It wasn't something that was just an artificially high number or an artificially low number. It was based on actual data from city fees to build streets. And the cost it may seem that the cost per foot for somebody doing a 25-foot wide street improvement is higher than the $600 being proposed, but that's because when you do a long-scale project, even at city prevailing wage rates, the cost is substantially cheaper when you're doing it block at a time rather than one lot at a time. So it's a much better use of funds to do this, and hopefully it creates a better road network. I think Mary Ann's examples were perfect examples of why it works in places like Southwest, because that gives the city the discretion or the neighborhoods the discretion to actually take that money and put it places where it makes sense, rather than asking a developer one block or one lot at a time to put something in that doesn't benefit anybody. One thing I will ask the council, and I would ask staff to consider, is I support the amendment to ask for waivers. I think if we're going to build a project in there, that it's fine to ask the people who buy the homes to not be able to fight the LID if it were to come into place. But I do think there should still maintain some system, whether it's the current appeal process or not, for a single homeowner or builder or developer to appeal the developments in general. I can come up with one example of a case where you might have a lot that sits on a corner lot in Southwest, and you want to do a fairly large remodel to your house. If it's a large enough remodel that it could trigger improvements, and you're on a corner, let's say, that has 300 feet of street improvements, I'm sure you would see that homeowner here at council asking, why do I have to pay $180,000 LTIC to do a remodel on my house? And so I think that there should be a mechanism. It shouldn't be easy. It should be the default position of staff should always be you either do the improvements or you pay your LTIC. However, there should be an appeal process for you to make your case to not have to do either. So that's what I want to say about that, and thank you for your support.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you both. Okay, others that were on the stakeholders committee that want to speak, and then anyone else that would like to speak on this item?
Those 6 other people signed up.
Okay.
Please come on up, Joe Walsh, Claire Carter, and Tom Karwacki.
Walsh, I think you're first.
For the record, my name is Joe Walsh. I represent Individuals for Justice. Mayor, I have good news. We're going to pass on this. We had a position before, but with the testimony that we listened to, it's made us at least confused at best and at worst. Wondering how people can understand this at home. If I was at home, and I was last week because I was ill, I'd be banging my head on my cocktail table because there is so much to comprehend in this. But people keep saying it's simple, and I don't get the simple part. It seems to me that if a developer develops an area, that they should build the sidewalks. That's, it just seems simple to me. Now, a single home is problematic. And what do you do with that? And I think some people have tried to answer that, but it's very confusing. So we're going to pass on this. We're not going to take a position on this at all because it's confusing. And normally when we get confused, we say no. We just say no because we don't understand it. And I was looking at your faces as this presentation was progressing. And I think there were points on each one of you, at least your face said, I don't have a clue what that person just said. So I'm glad you're not going to vote on it today. And I would ask this question, and I know we don't have back and forth, but just answer this one question. Can we keep the record open for the 2 weeks that you're going to hold this over so people can go back and look at this and maybe weigh in that have more expertise on this than we do? Or give us at least a few weeks to look at it and maybe send an email and take a position on it. So we would request that. I don't know if that's automatic.
It's certainly possible and certainly available in this case. True.
Okay, so that's our position. Thank you.
Claire, I think you're next.
Thank you very much. My name is Claire Carter. I'm at 6156 Southwest Nevada Court, Portland, Oregon. I'm here as a neighborhood representative from the Development Review Advisory Committee to testify in support of the proposed local transportation improvement charge initiative. I live in Maplewood neighborhood in Southwest. It has the lowest miles of streets with sidewalks in the Southwest area and ranks in the top 3 lowest neighborhoods in the city for miles of sidewalks. We have a big investment in the LTIC fund. In the past 5 years, Maplewood is a mostly residential neighborhood with many older homes located on large or double lots, and we've been a prime target for infill housing over the past 5 years. And over the past 5 years, we've had about 35 houses constructed, and only 2 built in the past year have had sidewalk improvements in front of them. As a neighborhood, we are not totally committed to sidewalks on every street. We like sidewalks on the higher traffic streets, of which we don't have many in our neighborhood, but also on our safe routes to school streets, which we do have in our neighborhood. This is kind of an example of how the LTIC might have, well, I don't know, it's of how the waivers have affected neighborhoods. We had 2 houses about 3 years ago that were built almost across the street from Maplewood Elementary School. The waivers were granted, no sidewalks were built, although this is a safe route, and it also is on the bus route and is one of the major kind of through routes in Maplewood neighborhood. Paved shoulders were put in by the developer, which was good, except that now the homeowners park their cars on the paved shoulders, and the children are kind of forced to walk on the white line, to the school, which is almost across the street from where these 2 new houses are built. We really want to see some opportunities to get some good transportation and actually pedestrian improvements funded in our neighborhood. And then the other piece, too, is the LTIC funds are not inconsequential when you look at the potential for leveraging more improvements in the neighborhoods. The 35 houses in Maplewood would have generated about $840,000 at the current rate. And that, if you wanted to go to some of the special funds that might be available for transportation improvements, could have leveraged as much as $8 million, because the match for some funds is the local match is 1 to 10. Very good. So we've got an opportunity here that we just cannot afford to not go forward with. I'm going to skip forward. I have a couple of amendments I would like to propose. The most important is this one, and it is for the Phase 3 scope of work, and that is the LTIC program is not just a neighborhood street program. I would like to see this reference changed throughout the entire scope to a neighborhood transportation program, which will be much more inclusive and much more reflective of what the needs really are for these LTIC funds. 2, the fees need to be indexed to the cost of inflation in construction. 3, the cost for constructing transportation infrastructure is not equitable, as you've already heard a couple of times from other testimony. And that needs to be focus of the Phase 3 scope of work. And also, 4th, but maybe not last, is we need to look at ways to achieve economic parity in the use of these funds throughout the city. Little Maplewood, one of the smallest neighborhoods in the city, could generate, because of its infill activity, as much as $840,000. There are some neighborhoods in the city which will not generate that kind of fund, but still have critical active transportation infrastructure needs. And I think that part of the Phase 3 work needs to be to figure out how to adjust that equity and the parity throughout the city in the application or the use of these funds. I really appreciate PBOT and the city's forward thinking on this. I think this is an absolutely great proposal that we have before us. We cannot afford to not make it go forward into Phase 3. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Claire. Thanks very much. And Tom, welcome.
Tom Karwacki, University Park Neighborhood Association Vice Chair and Chair of the Land Use Committee, also one of the members of the Portland Bureau of Transportation Advisory Committee. And on behalf of both of those groups, I am supporting the ordinance and the associated consulting contract. I've spoken with 5 different neighborhood associations and their boards, and been part of this whole thing, and we've talked to a lot of the people about this. Proposed ordinance does fix a lot of the problems. That's why we need it. However, no ordinance is perfect in the first draft, and there are always separate situations where one size doesn't fit all. The first problem that has not been identified so far, but you will be hearing later from the folks from East Columbia, is the drainage districts. And on the map, it's not included in an MS4 area, and it should be. And so the area around adjacent to the Columbia River, these drainage districts will restrict any potential development, sidewalks, et cetera. So therefore, any payment of things will never, ever be able to be used in those areas. So there's some real concerns there. I've offered 3 solutions. There is a 4th one. The drainage district has some language as well. Number 1, you can define the situation away like Captain Kirk or an economist does, and just eliminate that area, the drainage district areas, as being a road or anything else. You could also alternatively exempt them, and I provided language on that to not collect the fee until the study is done, so that the study can do a little bit more look at this issue, or you could just simply tell the consultant to look at it. There is an insufficient cost recovery issue because of the inflation index. So, of course, having an inflation, I understand that is going to be part of it. However, that's not in the code itself. And so that's why there's always a concern that a lawyer might argue that it's not available to have an index unless it's actually spelled out in the code. So I've added some solution number B, which may also consider inflation after actual cost. Some people would argue, I understand the BPOT thinks that they have the authority to do that. However, we also have a solution C, which affects Commissioner Fritz's proposal, which is the payment of a local transportation infrastructure charge and issuance of a waiver of remonstrance will satisfy the requirements of the subsection. So there's some specific language there as well. The use of the funds, quite frankly, nobody trusts BPOT. And so this is a major issue. I've talked about doing only 75% into the coalition. People look at me and take my head off and say it should be 100% within the coalition territory. But there's a real issue of when these funds are going to be available and whether they're going to be, people will see things. So I think that it's a matter of trust that we actually do and solve this solution. And my amendment that I've suggested, and I think that Southwest Neighbors and some other groups has done as well, is found in that solution, which is that the LTIC must be spent within the geographic area in which they've been collected, and it spells it out. And by doing that here, rather than waiting for the study to do, will solidify and narrow the scope of the study so that some of what Dan was talking about, but it will also provide it so that fewer people will have a problem waiting. You're going to collect the money and we'll wait and hope that we get the results out of the study. You can actually do that right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. Okay, we have others that want to speak on this item.
Gary Clifford, Paul Grove, and Martha Johnson.
Okay, we'll take testimony on this and then have council discussion, just a process check. We're also going to then take up next our resolution, our 4/5 resolution about North Carolina, and then take a lunch break. So anybody who's waiting for other council calendar items, we'll come back to those at 2.
Actually, Mayor, Andrew Abbey says that he needs he can't stick around until after 2, so he asks that the LID issue be
Okay,
resolved.
all right, we'll do that one as well. That shouldn't take long. Okay. Good afternoon, welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Gary Clifford. I live on Paloma Road in the East Columbia neighborhood. And what I'm presenting is a proposed amendment that is worked out between our neighborhood organization leadership and the Multnomah County Drainage District. Problem is that, as most ordinances, that one size doesn't always fit. And we're saying that because we're in a managed floodplain, the addition of impermeable surfaces, such as paved sidewalks and parking lots, work directly against the mission of the Multnomah County Drainage District to manage our stormwater. As you go through our neighborhood, you'll see the open ditches, the sloughs, the massive pumps that pump millions of gallons of water. That's all paid for by our neighborhood directly to the drainage district, not the city. And what we're proposing is, in consultation with the drainage district, these words as amendment. In that some Portland neighborhoods exist within a managed floodplain whose characteristics require immediate removal of stormwater to prevent local funding, the LTIC should be amended to exclude collection of the transportation improvement charge where it is deemed by the local drainage district to create adverse conditions on the existing drainage system. The rationale for this amendment is the requirement that stormwater be immediately dealt with is to prevent local flood damage. Methods of removal include absorption by permeable ground, mechanical pumping, and local containment or ponding. Adding impermeable surfaces that collect and concentrate stormwater works against the safe and efficient management of a managed floodplain. Thus, the standard suite of impermeable street improvements is unlikely ever to be made, so money for them should not be collected in advance. I strongly urge your staff to work with the drainage district and take into consideration the uniqueness of our situation. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Paul, thank you. Next.
Mayor Hills, members of council, Paul Grove with the Portland Home Builders. I will be brief. We're here to testify in support of the proposal. You heard from one of our members, Justin Wood, who served as part of the stakeholder work group, and really appreciate the work of the stakeholder work group to try to arrive at a very balanced and thoughtful outcome on the issue. Internally, we did have some very robust discussions, in particular around the cost of the fee and what the waiver would look like or not look like moving forward. And those did present concerns to our membership. However, and as has been alluded to oftentimes on this today, we're talking about trade-offs, and that cost in terms of having a higher degree of certainty in the process and getting things through in a more timely fashion was ultimately of great interest and benefit for our membership. And so recognizing that trade-off and understanding that degree of certainty in the process moving forward was something that appealed to our folks and ultimately allowed us to arrive at that decision to be supportive of the proposal. So with that, I thank you for the opportunity.
This is not cheap, but the certainty obviously has a value, so I get it. Thank you. Hey, good afternoon. Welcome.
Hi, Martha Johnston. This is my personal response to this proposal listed on today's agenda. Please hear my plea. I'm writing this to extend my personal grievance on our lack of understanding on the future impacts of the LTIC going before City Council today. Although I must admit I've had a lot of answers to questions that weren't answered before. I'm very disappointed that the neighborhood task force member who was, as far as I can tell, acting as our representative for our neighborhood interest, did not have an appearance to have an agenda presence with our North Portland Neighborhood Association groups, or was not elected or appointed by consensus by the North Portland Land Use Group or its chairs. The working group did not pursue a citywide mailing to the affected parties or a public discussion on this most cronyist proposal. A done deal, as I'm being told. People realize that for the purported 17% of lots without sidewalks or even streets, this local transportation improvement charge is proposed at $600 per linear feet. So a person with an R5 corner lot with 150 foot of frontage would have to pay $90,000, not the $5,000 to $50,000 purported, into this PBOT slush fund for future improvements that will not likely to be used and are in fact disqualified from being used on the street in which it originated. For the East Columbia neighborhood, for which the smallest lots in our post-Vanport area would be R10, R20, RF, this could be several $100,000 payable on permitting. Before you can build your home, many of our citizens don't want sidewalks due to the horses, recreationalists, abundant wildlife that prefer wide, soft shoulders. Also, our stormwater drainage issues complicate the build-out of such structures. And the other option would be to build without the benefit of economies of scale that a whole street improvement can provide its owners and the benefits of an LID construction financing at a favorable rate over a 20-year period. Without these appropriate public benefits, this required building indeed would be an onerous burden as well. That's why 12,000 to 16,000 homeowners have appealed to the city and been awarded waiver of remonstrances, which provide for a yes on participation in future financial development costs through the LID process. This is a rational approach which should be looked at first for any needed improvements if it is not providing the streets and sidewalks. An ordinance would quite possibly remove sustainability of all the economic value from the private properties targeted. How can it be said that by adding, say, $100,000 of development costs to a single residential lot, that it will not have an effect on the affordability? If purchasing a home from a developer, does one really think that a developer will not pass every dollar of cost and then some onto the cost of the building? It obviously will. If safety alone is the factor driving this horrendous confiscation of funds, then let's get busy with an elected or consensus-appointed representative from Northeast Portland to develop a full-body discussion and perhaps consensus that might have a chance at a fair say. Just to let you know, I have a corner R10 lot for sale and I'm greatly affected by this LTIC. I've been saving for it all my life. My husband and I have owned it 38 years. This is our retirement. Now, whammo, we gotta have a streets and sidewalks on an area that has no streets and sidewalks are very, very few. I only found out by chance, no mail out to the 7,000 or so affected owners about to lose this important tool for street and street development if desired by the citizens on that street. Let the citizens on that street make the choice if they want to do an LID. That's what it's all about. Oh, did I mention the issue of if your house burned down? Would your insurance cover the rebuild cost of this charge? It's not a permit fee, right? I've talked to several insurance agents and they are not quite certain. You better take out increase code insurance, increase amount of insurance, because if this burns down, they're willing to pay the $50,000 in permit fees, but will they be willing to pay a $150,000 charge
think they said it doesn't count in that instance, that it wouldn't be.
That's what I've heard today, but I didn't see it in the ordinance.
Thank you.
Please
Because
don't
if
throw
you'd
the
like to
baby
give us
out
the
with
rest
the
of your testimony
bathwater.
in writing, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. No, you've raised some good issues. We appreciate it. Thank you all. Okay, anyone else wants to speak on this item? Okay, so Commissioner, this has been a first reading. We've got work to do on amendments. How would you like to proceed?
Well, we might have amendment language to present, but the city attorney's office has said that since the waiver of remonstrance amendment is a substantive amendment, they prefer us to hold on to that until next week. What I'm hoping that we can do is say that this has been the hearing on every other aspect of this ordinance, and that next week we'll present an amendment specifically on that language, and we'll take testimony only on that amendment, not on anything else.
I think that sounds reasonable to me. I think
Oh,
this hearing has ventilated the issue. There's obviously technical work still to do, so.
And I have multiple things. So
Okay.
actually, given that we have other folks waiting to testify and it's lunchtime and
So could we
I'd like to
continue
just
this
continue
and
it.
then bring staff back for a more thorough discussion? That's,
because I have potentially another amendment.
Since an issue was raised by a member of the public, can I just clarify
Yeah,
one thing
please.
with staff? So we had a letter from our friends in the University Park Neighborhood Association and from others about stormwater cost recovery. And could you just clarify what is contemplated within the $600 per foot proposal?
For the record, Kruger with Peabody. The $600 per foot was based on an averaging of a number of projects that include all elements that go into the street improvement: street trees, stormwater, sidewalks, ADA ramps, street lights, pavement, the rock below the pavement. All those elements were put into the mix and averaged to come up with that cost.
Okay, so I think it's gonna be useful as we go forward to just clarify that and give folks a breakdown, because it's been raised by some of our most engaged partners. So I want to make sure that's clear, and that we're not, in addition, proposing shifting any new cost to BES as part of this proposal. So thank you, Kurt.
yeah, so Commissioner Novick, I think because of both the hour and the complexity of this, that continuing this hearing is a good idea. I want to reassure you, though, however, that I know there might be a fear that this is going to bog down. I think quite the contrary. I think you've cut the Gordian knot of an issue that has been around for a very long time. There's work to do, and there's subsequent phases of work to do, and there are technical issues like this issue about the drainage districts that need to be addressed. But I think you have finally found the solution to a problem that we've been talking about for decades, and I'm very enthusiastic. Personal note, as somebody who used to wait for the bus at the corner of 35th and Vermont amongst the mud puddles, I can certainly sympathize with the need to get on with this.
Mayor, I just want to, given what you just said, I want to make it clear that I do not think that we're going to address every issue, including the issue relating to drainage districts, next week.
Not next week, no.
I think that our goal here is to pass something that stops what we're doing now and starts doing something somewhat smart and work out a lot of details later.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I understand the phased approach that you're taking, so we'll take up the amendment next week
And I may
on the
have
subject
others.
of LIDs, and perhaps another amendment next week? Okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've heard some good suggestions for amendments today, too, that I don't want to belabor them now, but I think some of Mr. Karwicki's suggestions.
Yeah, those are good.
I am concerned about the drainage district, about an appeal process, so, I want to have the opportunity to delve in those, but not now.
So let's continue this then for a week. Is that enough? I think that's enough time, right?
Yeah.
So let's continue this for a week. Council will return to the item and take up proposed amendments, based on council members' own ideas and the testimony we've heard today.
Are we gonna do this on a time certain, Mayor, or just a regular agenda?
What's next week look like, Carla?
We're already going to 11 o'clock with time certains.
Okay. So let's
The-
we'll have to put it on the regular agenda then.
Okay, the afternoon is available.
Oh, then let's put it on the afternoon as a time certain.
2 p.m.
Okay. How's that sound, Steve? Does that work? Sure. Okay.
Can I just toss a wrench into the plan? So next week, I'm traveling to Kansas City for the Community Streetcar Coalition.
Okay.
So my team would be here without me if you want to delay it for a week after that.
Do that. 2 weeks.
I hate to do that.
It's
but-
nodding, so I.
Yeah, Kurt doesn't want to do this by himself. All right, we're not going to do that to Kurt. So 2 weeks from now, how does that look, Carla?
We have a we have a crazy day,
Yeah.
I would stick with next week, Mayor.
All right.
We've
We'll
got a
have to
very
let-
talented
we'll have
team
to
here.
let
Next
Kurt,
person up.
take it. All right, we'll continue this for 1 week to 2 p.m. time certain next Wednesday.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good work. Good work. 1 more week after 25 years. We're getting close. All right, now let's move, please, to item 313-1. I know we have some people here to speak on this, and then we'll take up the LID after that. So 313-1, please.
Declare City Council condemnation of North Carolina's Public Facilities Privacy and Securities Act and temporarily suspend city travel by a public employee to the state of North Carolina until the act is overturned.
So we put this on the council calendar today because just as we had to a year ago when Indiana passed legislation that was contrary to the progress that we've made as a country in human rights, once again, we've had a state go in the wrong direction. And to my eye, there are really two things that are fundamentally wrong with what's happened in North Carolina. One is that we do believe that we're on a march of progress towards more understanding of human rights, more support for human rights, and more acceptance of our differences as a society. Yes, there are places in the world and currents in the world that are going in the wrong direction, but I believe as an American that we're making progress, and when we slide backwards, that's wrong. And then secondly, once again, we have a state legislature telling a city not to do something. That's a fundamentally bad idea too. Cities need to have the authority to take care of their own citizens. Cities are where a majority of people live, and a huge majority of economic activity takes place. Legislatures need to simply stop doing this. We just got our legislature to lift a preemption on inclusionary housing, something we should have done years ago. Legislatures have better things to do than to stop cities from making progress. So that's my motivation behind this, and I know other council members have strong feelings on the matter as well. We have some folks here that would like to speak. So,
With that in mind, Mayor, I actually have a minor amendment.
Okay.
Because I do believe we need to call out the courage of the city of Charlotte, North Carolina.
Yes.
So my amendment is to add first, whereas the city of Charlotte, North Carolina voted on February 22nd, 2016 to approve a local non-discrimination ordinance, and then add after the first, be it further resolved that the Portland City Council commends the Charlotte City Council's action in approving their local non-discrimination ordinance, and Mayor Charlie Hales will contact Mayor Jennifer Roberts to express support for their leadership.
it's a very, very good idea. Any discussion on this amendment before we take testimony? So motion to accept the amendment. Let's take a vote, please.
Fritz?
Aye.
Fish?
Aye.
Saltzman?
Aye.
Novick?
Aye.
Hales?
Thank you very much. Aye. Okay, well, I know there's some folks that were here that would like to speak on this item. Come on up, and we'd love to hear from you.
I have Martha, is it John, and Jane Ferzini?
There we go.
Here she is. Gina Frazini is here.
Sorry.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mayor Hales and City Council members. I know that this resolution comes forward today with the unanimous support of the council, and I could not be less surprised at your continuing leadership. Portland has led the way both in our state and across the country in extending human rights and in tackling tough conversations. My name is Gina Frazini. I'm the co-executive director of Basic Rights Oregon, and my testimony today is really aimed at folks in the larger community who may not understand just how dangerous this law in North Carolina is. So, of course, I'm here to support, express strong support of your resolution to ban travel to North Carolina. I love that you're also encouraging businesses and other governments to follow your lead. The law passed this last week is deeply troubling, targeting transgender people who are among the most vulnerable in our communities. More than 90% of transgender people report harassment or discrimination in the workplace, and more than 40% will attempt suicide in their lifetimes due to just this kind of dialogue happening in the community that attacks them and the lack of acceptance and the outright discrimination that they face. North Carolina has codified discrimination against transgender people with the passage of HB 2. The law will actively hurt transgender people and others who will not be able to simply use the bathroom in libraries, public hospitals, or most airports because of fear of violence, harassment, and now arrest. This law is in direct conflict with federal laws that say transgender people have the right to use restrooms that match their gender, and it'll subject schools and public facilities to expensive federal complaints and lawsuits. It also bars local protections in public accommodations on the basis of gender identity, sexual orientation, and veteran status. The folks who passed this law argued wrongly that transgender people endanger others. This is hurtful and wrong and feeds a culture of violence and misunderstanding that transgender people already face. Oregon passed legal protections for people based on their gender identity and sexual orientation in 2007, after similar ordinances had been passed here in Portland and in a dozen other cities and counties across the state, and no harm has been caused. In fact, these protections strengthen our communities and ensure dignity and respect for all who call Oregon home. This year, Basic Rights Oregon celebrates its 20th year, working in partnership with government leaders, with businesses, and the community. Together, we've made Oregon one of the most LGBTQ-friendly states in the country, and we're so grateful to live in a city and state that values fairness and equality, a state that gives all of us the opportunity to succeed no matter who we are and who we love. Thank you for your continued leadership.
Thank you for yours. Anyone else like to speak on this item? Then let's please vote. Before we do, I just want to clarify that the purpose of this resolution the effect of this resolution is it will be directing the Chief Administrative Officer to identify North Carolina as a prohibited travel destination and update the city's travel procedures accordingly. Bureau directors will be responsible for ensuring compliance with this prohibition. Okay, let's vote, please.
Fritz?
Oh, thank you for all of your work, and I'm glad to take this opportunity to announce that in the upgrade of the Pioneer Courthouse Square bathrooms that is being funded with the Fix Our Parks budget, bond measure, as well as with system development charges, we will have a gender-neutral bathroom as well as the folks can choose one side or the other. We're putting it into practice here, and it's going to provide service for everybody, which is what we would try to do. And thank you, Mayor, for your leadership. Thank you, Rachel Wiggins, for yours in drafting this resolution. Aye.
Fish?
Mayor Hales, thank you for taking the lead on this and acting so swiftly. Gina and Basic Rights Oregon, thank you for taking the lead statewide on issues of concern to transgender individuals. And we were very proud to partner with you in December to adopt an all-user restroom policy in the city, following the good work of the county and building on the expertise of your organization. So thank you. And I want to just note, Mayor, that the City Council of Charlotte voted on February 22nd, 2016, to approve legislation expanding anti-discrimination protections. When the North Carolina Assembly met in an emergency session to preempt the city's ordinance, within 12 hours, a bill was introduced, debated, passed, and signed by the governor. That probably sets an all-time record for legislative efficiency. And for those who think that this may have been an aberration and might have been a close call, it passed in the House 82-26 and unanimously in the Senate 32-0. There was not a single dissenting voice in the Senate of the great state of North Carolina. So shame on them. And I'm very proud today to join with my colleagues in making a clear statement that we value all Oregonians and we believe in basic rights for everyone. Aye.
Councilman?
Thank you, Mayor Hills, for bringing this forward. It's always surprising to me how out of touch increasingly state capitals are with the people they're elected to represent, as opposed to cities. And I know Mayor Hills has made this point over and over, that cities are increasingly where great decisions are made, or whether it's around climate change, around basic rights, other issues around equity. And this is another prima facie example of exactly that, where a state capital is completely out of touch with probably, I would guess, a majority of the citizens and residents they are elected to represent, as opposed to the city of Charlotte, which seems to have an accurate pulse of what matters to people. And so I'm very proud to stand with you to condemn the state legislature and the governor of North Carolina, just as we did with Indiana about a year ago, and make it hurt in their economic pocketbook. And that's what this will do, along with the combined actions of cities and states throughout this nation. Aye.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor, for your leadership in this. Thank you, Gina, for your leadership. it's really sad to see what's happened to the North Carolina legislature in the past several years. I mean, North Carolina used to be like a moderately progressive southern state, and the legislature has been taken over by zealots on this and a variety of other issues. And it's nice to have this opportunity to express solidarity with the people of Charlotte and other people in that state who are living under this outrageous legislature. And we have some complaints about our legislature periodically, but I'm glad we don't live in North Carolina and hoping that state will right itself at some point. Aye.
You know, this summer, the United States Conference of Mayors is going to meet in Indianapolis, and I'm going to be very happy to go there because similar action was taken by cities all over the country and by people all over the country to condemn the backsliding effort of the Indiana state legislature to walk back towards the dark ages. And it worked. And they repealed that law. And I congratulated Mayor Ballard in Indianapolis at that point. And of course, we're all going to go to Indianapolis and celebrate the progress of that great city. And likewise, our good wishes do go out to the thoughtful leadership of the city of Charlotte. I will call Mayor Roberts this afternoon and let her know that we've taken this action and that we support the progressive public policy that that city has enacted. So it's something that I hope will work to their benefit soon when this wrong-headed idea is reversed, just as it was in Indianapolis. But for the moment, the State Assembly of the state of North Carolina has decided to go back to the dark ages, and we literally will not go there. So our employees will be barred from traveling to that state until such time as this terrible law is repealed. Gina, thank you for your support and leadership for good policy in our state. Aye. Thank you. Thank you all very much.
Yay.
Okay, let's take up our final item of the so-called morning agenda, and then we'll take a break. And that's item number 312.
Create a local improvement district to construct street, sidewalk, stormwater, and sanitary sewer improvements from north of northeast of Columbia Boulevard to south of northeast Cornfoot Road in the Northeast 47th Avenue Phase 1 Local Improvement District, and increase project funding from Portland Bureau of Transportation System Development Charge revenue by $315,151.
Commissioner Novick.
Andrew Abbey.
Thank you, Commissioner. You're very kind to take this up as your final agenda item this morning. On March 2nd, Council approved a resolution of intent for Northeast 47th Avenue. We had 10 people here to testify in favor of the LID. We had 11 written letters of support. For today, we received no remonstrances against LID formation. We received a 12th letter of support from the Coley Association of Neighbors. I've passed that out to Carla, and she is handing that out to you right now. So the one change from the resolution phase to the ordinance phase today is that the resolution phase, we had a project budget of $5,706,291. The budget has increased by $516,599 for the purposes of adding a dry line sanitary sewer, which the BES Adjustment Committee approved yesterday in an extraordinary measure of collaboration between BES and PBOT, thereby increasing the project budget to $6,222,890 with no increase in the proposed assessment to property owners. So the only other point I wanted to make, I was just monitoring the discussion this morning, and I wanted to clarify there was a comment made there were 40 miles of unpaved streets in the city of Portland. I did want to clarify that as of June 30th of last year, there were 55.7 centerline miles of unpaved streets, so I just thought it'd be worth clarifying that. This particular project will not improve any unpaved streets, but it will help reduce the backlog of 306.8 miles, centerline miles of paved streets without curbs. Happy to answer
One
any
reason you
questions.
know that, of course, is that there are less miles of such streets because of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, you'll be hearing more about that on April 20th. But yeah, we actually have made some progress over the last 15 years. Not as much as we'd like, but we are slowly chipping away at that backlog.
Okay, other questions for Andrew?
Just one, Andrew. If we adopt Commissioner Novick's proposal that we discussed earlier, will that mean that you will have fewer opportunities to come before us and invoke waivers of remonstrances?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because when I interviewed for my position, I said I wanted to get all the streets paved and put myself out of a job. So at the current rate, I think I'll live to be about 600 years old, so.
That's a prescription for long life.
Still be working for the city. huh?
Here's
Yeah.
to your longevity. To the next 600.
We'd like to have you have a really great 200-year life.
Yeah, and I don't want to work as long as John Thurman did from South Carolina. I would like to retire before then. So.
Okay. Anyone else would like to speak on this item? It's a hearing, and if not, then we'll close the hearing, and it'll come back next week.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Okay, and we're recessed till 2 p.m.